Arya Stark stood in the courtyard of Winterfell, her breath coming in ragged gasps, a fine layer of frost clinging to the ends of her dark hair. Her hand still gripped the Valyrian steel dagger that had ended the Night King, the blade now coated in dark flakes of the ancient creature's death. Around her, the bodies of the whites and scattered corpses of the living filled the courtyard in a grotesque mosaic. The sky, once tinged an otherworldly black-blue in the chaos of the battle, had begun to lighten as though dawn dared to creep upon the horizon after what felt like an unending night. Blood dripped from a shallow cut beneath Arya's chin, and her left ear rang with the aftermath of the clangor of steel and the shrieking undead. Yet she stood, for a moment, impossibly still. Her heart thundered in her chest. She had never dreamed that she would be the one. Countless times she had whispered the names of those she would kill, Cersei Lannister, Walder Frey, the Hound, and many others, but never had she whispered the Night King's name. That had seemed a foe far beyond her realm of vengeance. Yet somehow, in the roiling chaos of the battle, in that final breath of opportunity, she had leapt, dagger in hand, her training guiding her muscles through a motion that no plan could have orchestrated. Now she felt simultaneously weightless and unbearably heavy. Saviors, especially in the stories old Nan used to tell, were often crowned with glory. Arya felt only exhaustion and disbelief. The hush that fell across Winterfell's courtyard was surreal. The clash of steel against brittle bone, the screams of living soldiers fighting the dead, it had all ceased the instant the Night King shattered under her blade. An eerie stillness reigned, as if the entire world held its breath, uncertain whether the threat was truly gone. Arya's gaze panned across the yard, searching for familiar faces. She saw Jon crouched by the broken gate, sword still in hand, eyes wide, chest heaving. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite parse: admiration, wonder, perhaps even fear. She could not blame him. In that moment she barely recognized herself. She felt the approach of others behind her. The living began to gather, forming a tight circle around the spot where the Night King had fallen. At her feet, the last fragments of his crystalline body flickered with dying magic. Arya blinked, her breath fogging in the cold air. She wanted to speak but found her tongue caught between her teeth. Then, Bran's voice pierced the silence with a simple statement that felt more profound than anything she had ever heard. "You did it," he said, from his seat near the Godwood entrance, his voice a distant echo of both pride and inevitability. Something in Arya's chest clenched when she heard that. Yes, she had done it. And now the entire realm stood on the precipice of a new dawn. Soon the silence broke. A roar of jubilation, first uncertain, then swelling with unstoppable force, rose from the survivors. Swords clanged against shields, voices rose in victory, and sobs of relief mingled with joyous laughter. They rushed to Arya, some clasping her arms, others chanting her name. She felt her cheeks burn. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from sudden overwhelming emotion. She glanced around for her sister, Sansa, and found her emerging from the great hall, tears streaking through soot and blood on her face. They locked eyes, and in that moment, Arya recognized the relief and reverence in Sansa's gaze, something that dwarfed all their petty arguments of the past. Sansa bowed her head in gratitude, a queenly gesture of respect and awe. Arya, dumbstruck, managed only a small nod in return before she was swept off her feet by the sheer tide of people pressing around her. She sought out Jon again, hoping to anchor herself in his presence. Their eyes locked for a brief moment across the throng. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but he was quickly lost in a crush of battered knights and wildlings and men of the north cheering in the frigid air. Arya suspected the words might have been something to the effect of, "You saved us all," or "I'm proud of you," but they were swallowed in the roar of victory. A few paces away, Daenerys Targaryen stood, hair matted with blood and dust, her pale face streaked with tears. She gazed upon Arya with an expression that was difficult to read, something between admiration, gratitude, and a flicker of envy. After all, the realm had expected the Targaryen queen and her dragons to be the herald of salvation. But here was a young woman from the north, once a wolf cub with no claim to thrones or destiny, whose dagger had changed the fate of the world. Grey Worm and the Unsullied began regrouping around Daenerys, while the Dothraki, what was left of them, raised their scimitars in cheer. The exultation spread outward in ripples. It filled the courtyard, then the ramparts, then the fields just beyond the walls where the living still fought the straggling whites, only to find them collapsing in heaps of lifelessness. The war for survival was over. They had won. And as Arya looked down at the dagger in her hand, that slender blade of Valyrian steel, it glimmered beneath the first rays of dawn, as if to say, "This is only the beginning." In the following hours, the wounded were carried inside. The maesters and healers rushed to tend to those they could save. As the sun fully broke over the horizon, Arya found herself guided into the great hall. It was an unspoken collective effort. Everyone seemed to want to funnel her into a place of safety and warmth. Her knees quaked and her shoulders trembled with an exhaustion that sank bone deep. Yet she could not rest. Not yet. People needed her presence, needed to see the hero, to believe that the unimaginable had truly been done. She, who once scurried through the corridors of Winterfell chasing cats, now had to stand tall before the entire realm. Sansa and Bran took places beside her. Jon stood near the front of the hall, grappling with his own swirl of emotions. Daenerys took her seat near the high table. Though it was not truly hers by right, she was a guest in the Starks' ancestral home. To the surprise of many, Sansa lifted a hand for quiet. Her voice, though not loud, carried through the hush that immediately descended. "Our enemy is vanquished," she declared, the words solemn and sure. "By the hand of Arya Stark." A cheer rose again, thunderous enough to shake the rafters. Arya felt her cheeks grow hot once more. She wished, not for the first time, that she could vanish into some hidden shadow. But she recalled the mantra that carried her through the darkest nights: fear cuts deeper than swords. She swallowed, summoning a portion of the courage that had guided her through myriad faces, countless hardships. She could not shy away now. She forced herself to stand straighter, not quite meeting the eyes of everyone present, but at least giving them something to see, a Stark of Winterfell shaped by tribulations, hardened by faceless nights. At once a lethal blade and a quiet girl yearning for simpler days. In the corner, Ghost and a few other dire wolves from the wild pack that had once roamed the north prowled restlessly, as if sensing that the pack had a new alpha. It reminded Arya of Nymeria, the dire wolf she had set free so long ago. She wondered if Nymeria felt a tug in her wild heart at this moment, some intangible bond that whispered of her human sister's destiny. For the next day and night, celebration and mourning intertwined. The halls of Winterfell were filled with songs of triumph, but also punctuated by the keening cries of those who had lost friends, lovers, and kin. Gendry sat at a table near the great hearth, gazing into his half-empty cup of ale with a mixture of sorrow and relief. Davos, looking more weathered than ever, comforted a wounded man from the Vale. Tyrion Lannister, face drawn, sipped wine in uncharacteristic silence, occasionally casting thoughtful glances in Arya's direction. Varys lingered nearby, his spider sense piqued by the sudden shift in power dynamics. The realm had pinned its hopes on Targaryen fire, yet it was northern steel in Arya's hand that had saved them all. Once the initial shock had dissipated, the lords and ladies of the north, and even those from beyond, began to whisper questions about the future. The Great War, as they now called it, was over, but the war for the Iron Throne remained unresolved. In the candlelit corners of the feast hall, murmurs floated. Should the realm kneel to Daenerys Targaryen, breaker of chains, or was the rightful King Jon Snow once revealed to be Aegon Targaryen, or dare they even breathe it, was this northern girl, the slayer of the Night King, meant to lead them into a new era? Arya was not privy to all these discussions, but she sensed the shifting currents. People approached her with wide eyes and hopeful smiles, bowing deeper than they ever had. Some clasped her hands in theirs, stammering thanks, pledging their swords or their service should she ever need it. This was not the same as the respect they showed Sansa or the battle honors they bestowed upon Jon. Arya's deed cut to the marrow of survival itself. And though she tried to brush it off, her mind circled like a wary wolf around a central question: what did saving the realm mean for her future? Still, the next morning, her only desire was to walk among the courtyard and ramparts, observing the cleanup efforts. She lent a hand wherever she could, unafraid to help carry the wounded on makeshift stretchers or retrieve the broken, burnt scraps of what had once been the outer defenses. Here and there, she encountered half-collapsed men who still saluted her, or women whose eyes brimmed with tears at the sight of her. Some reached out to brush her sleeve, as if expecting a holy blessing. Arya felt a pang of discomfort each time. She was just Arya Stark. She had fought monsters, assassinated enemies, but had she ever wanted this? Reverence, like she was a savior from a story? Near midday, she retreated to the Godwood, where the heart tree stood in silent witness to the ages. The carved face in the bark seemed to regard her with an unreadable expression. She knelt beneath its red leaves, letting her head rest against the trunk. She closed her eyes, trying to find a moment of peace. The hush of the Godwood was broken by a soft footstep. Bran's voice drifted toward her. "Arya," he said simply, his tone strange, as though touched with cosmic knowledge that had once baffled her. She opened her eyes and turned to see him in his wheeled chair, hands folded in his lap. A faint smile flickered across his pale features. "Bran," she greeted. She found it difficult to speak casually with her brother, who was no longer the boy she knew but some sort of living archive of memories. Yet she tried, because they were still blood, still Starks. I needed a moment alone." "I know," Bran said. He looked up at the canopy of the godwood. Sunlight trickled through the crimson leaves, painting dappled patterns on the snow. But the realm will not let you remain alone for long. Arya let out a breath. I don't want them following me around, bowing and scraping. They keep calling me savior, calling me a hero. I'm not sure how to be that. Her voice shook just a bit. You never asked for it, Bran said in understanding. But you are. You changed everything. And some will interpret that as a sign. People cling to symbols, Arya, especially in the aftermath of an apocalypse. She studied him, frowning. Are you saying they'll try to make me do something I don't want to do? Like sit on the Iron Throne? Bran looked thoughtful. Possibilities branch like the roots of this tree. Your destiny was never set in stone, as mine was. But you have a claim now, one forged by deeds, not by blood alone. The people see a young woman who ended the great threat. They see someone who fought for them when kings and queens of old were helpless. And yes, they may ask you to lead them. The question is, do you want that? Arya opened her mouth, poised to declare a resounding no. She remembered traveling across the narrow sea, training with the faceless men, learning how to slip into shadows. Ruling from a throne was the last thing she'd ever desired. She was the wolf that roamed. She wasn't meant to be caged by politics, or so she believed. Yet the memory of that moment, the Night King's cold presence, the crisp snap of Valyrian steel, the hush that fell as he shattered, kept returning to her. She had power now, not only in her stealth and skill but in the hearts of people she had saved. Power was dangerous, she knew, but it could also be used to protect. Could she do more good by accepting that she was no longer a simple wolf among shadows? She shivered at the thought. I don't know, she finally whispered. I don't think I do. But what if it's the best thing for the North? For the realm? Bran's gaze was distant. You'll know when the time is right. She wanted to press him for clarity. Surely the three-eyed raven could see if she would ascend a throne. But she realized that even if he did know, he would not simply reveal it. And maybe that was for the best. Fate always had a way of twisting when people tried to hold it too tightly. She stood, placing a hand on Bran's shoulder briefly. He nodded, and they sat in companionable silence, the heart tree's face watching with ancient patience. Over the next week, the living sorted through the ruins of Winterfell and planned for the future. The Night King's defeat had left behind a fragile calm. No one quite knew how to proceed. Daenerys, anxious to claim her birthright, reasserted that she intended to march south to King's Landing and dethrone Cersei Lannister. Jon was torn between loyalty to the North and his half-sister cousin's rightful claim, if you believed Targaryen tradition. Yet daily, more and more lords arrived, paying homage not to Daenerys, not to Jon, but to Arya. She tried to avoid the fanfare by immersing herself in the recovery work. One afternoon, while helping to clear debris from a collapsed tower, she noticed Gendry approaching, broad shoulders still bearing scars from the fight. She paused, leaning on a makeshift lever, and offered him a small smile. Done forging new weapons? She asked, recalling how she had once asked him to craft a custom spear. He grinned, though it was tinged with sadness. For the moment, there's enough scrap steel around that we'll be reforging swords for a year, at least. But I figured I'd come see if you needed an extra set of hands. His presence warmed her in a way she couldn't fully articulate. She recalled the nights they had spent under the same roof, the journeys on the King's Road, the bonds formed through shared hardship. Sure, she said, pulling at a broken beam. Grab that side. They heaved together, tossing the wood onto a growing pile. Beneath the debris was a battered shield bearing the Mormont sigil. Arya swallowed hard, thinking of brave Lyanna Mormont who had fallen in the battle. They set the shield aside respectfully. As they worked, Gendry shot her sidelong glances. Finally, he spoke up, voice tentative. You know, I've seen a lot of men and women, and I mean a lot, fight and brag, boast about their deeds. But everyone's quiet when they talk about you. Like they're in awe. They say you did the impossible. Arya pressed her lips together. She hated the feeling that they expected her to be someone bigger, more glorious than she felt. I was lucky, she replied. It could have been anyone who got that chance. But it wasn't anyone, he insisted gently. It was you. After a pause, he added, and you deserve every bit of praise you get. She shoved her hair out of her face, a mixture of sweat and dirt making it cling to her forehead. Sometimes I wish it wasn't me, she admitted. It's strange to be looked at this way. Gendry considered her words. Maybe it's strange because it's new. But you've earned the respect. And if they want to give you a crown, well, maybe there's a reason. Someone's going to wear it. Better you than some tyrant. He said it lightly, but Arya felt the weight in his words. She gave him a grateful nod, though she couldn't muster a proper response. It had never occurred to her that Gendry might see her as a better candidate for rulership than Daenerys or even Jon. But if she was being honest, the thought had crossed her mind with a sort of fearful curiosity. Could she do it? Could she hold the realm together? The idea made her tremble inside, yet she did not dismiss it outright anymore. Meanwhile, Daenerys grew more restless. She insisted on hosting councils in the Great Hall, pressing for the immediate march south. Cersei remained on the Iron Throne, a dagger at the back of all who threatened her reign. Every day that Daenerys lingered in the north, she risked losing momentum, giving Cersei time to strengthen King's Landing's defenses. Arya attended these councils only because Sansa requested her presence. At first, Arya tried to remain in the background, letting the lords and ladies speak. But inevitably, the conversation turned to her. "What say you, Slayer of the Night King?" Daenerys would inquire, in a tone that might have been neutral but carried undercurrents of both respect and apprehension. Arya began speaking her mind in these sessions, pushing for caution. The living forces were decimated, exhausted. Winterfell needed time to recover. If they marched south at that moment, they would be vulnerable. Daenerys did not like the caution, but she could not deny the logic. Jon hovered at Daenerys' side, trying to mediate. Tyrion listened carefully to every word Arya spoke, occasionally interjecting with a measured remark that reflected his subtle support for her reasoning. Varys watched them all, the wheels of politics spinning in his mind. As these days of uneasy deliberation wore on, something unthinkable began to happen. Lesser lords, and even some of the small folk who had traveled north to escape the war, started openly talking about the notion that the hero who saved them from the undead might also be the one to lead them afterward. Arya overheard it in the corridors, in the courtyard, in the corner of the feast hall. Her name was uttered with awe and sometimes with fanatical devotion. Tales spread quickly, how she had trained as a faceless assassin, how she'd traveled the world, how she was a swift blade in the darkness. Some said she was the chosen champion of the many-faced god, a god of death who ironically preserved life by striking death incarnate. Others whispered she was an avatar of the old gods come to protect the north. Myths sprouted overnight, each adding to her mystique. Daenerys, once revered as the mother of dragons, now found herself overshadowed. That awareness burned in her violet eyes. Tension crackled in the air between the Targaryen queen and the Stark girl. Each passing day confirmed that the realm's gratitude and, in many cases, devotion was shifting. Daenerys was not blind to it. She tried to keep her composure, but resentment simmered. The quiet friction threatened to crack the fragile alliance. Finally, the time came for a great gathering in Winterfell's hall where the major lords would decide the next course of action. The North was well within its rights to name a king or queen in the North as they had done with Jon before, but now new possibilities loomed. Some even whispered of a northern queen for the entire 7 kingdoms or however many kingdoms might remain after so much devastation. They assembled in the hall. Sansa took her place near the high table, her post. You're regal, her red hair braided neatly. Jon stood with Daenerys at the forefront, though uneasy tension radiated between them. Arya lingered by the pillar to the side, arms crossed, trying not to look as though she was waiting for something dreadful. Lords from the Riverlands, the Vale, the Reach, what was left of it, the Stormlands, and Dorne had sent representatives. Each had braved the cold north because the conflict with the dead had demanded unity. Now they faced a different unity question: who would lead them into peacetime? Daenerys, in her silver-white fur cloak, spoke first, calling upon them to honor her rightful claim to the Iron Throne. She spoke of breaking chains, liberating slaves, offering a world free of tyranny. She recounted how she had lost most of her Dothraki and unsullied in this war for the living. Her voice was passionate. She urged them to march with her to King's Landing to end Cersei's reign. Jon followed, a bit awkwardly, repeating that while Daenerys had the stronger claim by blood and right, he had pledged to the north. He acknowledged that he too had Targaryen blood, but he did not want the throne. He spoke haltingly but sincerely of the need for unity. Tyrion then stepped forward, meticulously laying out the political scenario. He spoke of the alliances formed, the debts owed, the risks of turning on one another. He tried to persuade them that a Targaryen restoration would stabilize the realm. Yet as he spoke, Arya could sense the shifting undercurrent in the room. She felt the eyes of many drifting to her. The hush was palpable, like a collective inhalation before a name is spoken. When Tyrion paused for breath, Lord Royce of the Vale cleared his throat. We of the Vale have reason to be grateful to House Stark, he began, voice carrying easily in the quiet. It was Lady Sansa who guided us to victory against Ramsay Bolton. It was Arya Stark who slew the Night King. The Knights of the Vale have always supported the North when the cause was just. And now we find ourselves in a realm uncertain of its leadership. He glanced in Arya's direction. Sometimes the best claim is not one of blood or conquest, but of proven valor and unwavering defense of the realm. There are whispers, Your Grace, he added, half bowing to Daenerys before looking at Arya, that perhaps the realm's true savior is already here among us. Murmurs rippled. Daenerys stiffened visibly, her face betraying disbelief and indignation. Jon looked at Arya, eyes wide, unsure what to say. Sansa's gaze was steady, though unreadable. More voices joined in. A representative from the Riverlands, one of the Tully cousins, spoke. The North might name its own queen, and if that queen happens to be the savior of the realm, then might it not be wise for all the realms to accept her? The Iron Throne has led to bloodshed after bloodshed. Perhaps a new seat of power is in order. A hum of agreement spread, though not all were on board. A few of the southern lords shook their heads, reluctant to enthrone a northern warrior who had no tradition of southern rule. Yet none could deny that the figure standing calmly to the side had done the unimaginable. Daenerys attempted to maintain composure, but Arya saw the fury flicker in her eyes. Arya Stark has my utmost respect, she said, each word carefully measured. But we must not forget the long history of this realm. The Targaryens united the 7 kingdoms. My father was usurped by force. Now, after all this war, can we truly say that more upheaval is the solution? I have fought beside you. I have lost my children, my dragons, to protect you. Will you deny me my birthright now? Will you rend the realm apart once more? Silence pressed down, heavy with the weight of a question no one dared answer. All eyes turned to Arya. She had not wanted this. But the realm was forging a path for her, or so it seemed. She took a breath, then stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried. I never asked to rule, she said. I never wanted a crown or power. My life was shaped by warfare, by survival. I fought for my home and my family. If you want a queen who will deliver speeches from a throne, you have Daenerys Targaryen. She is practiced at it. I am not. A hush. Then she continued, but I will say this, I killed the Night King not by accident. I trained to be no one, so that I could be the weapon the North needed. I am Arya Stark, daughter of Winterfell, Wolf of the North. My father believed in justice and honor. My brother died for independence. My sister fought for survival. I have shed blood for vengeance and for mercy alike. If the realm truly thinks I can lead, I will not turn away because I believe there is a better world to be forged. But it must be the will of the people, not the ambition of one or two. I am not here to usurp, I am here only to serve. Her words carried sincerity that was hard to deny. Some in the hall nodded solemnly, others clasped their hands in fervent agreement. Daenerys looked as though she wanted to protest, but the tension in the room had reached a breaking point. She knew pressing her claim in that moment might alienate half the lords there. Jon, torn, stepped back, letting events unfold as they might. Over the coming days, a storm of political debate consumed Winterfell. Letters flew by raven to every corner of the land. Lords argued, knights whispered, the small folk spun legends about the girl who slew the darkness. Some believed the realm owed its fealty to Daenerys, the Targaryen queen who had come to save them and sacrificed so much. Others believed it was time for a new line, a queen chosen by deed rather than birthright. Many, including the northern lords, championed Arya, remembering how the Targaryens had once burned and pillaged their land. The arguments grew heated. Fistfights broke out in the courtyard. Camp followers and soldiers took sides. Through it all, Arya felt her nerves fray. She had endured so much pain, so many terrors, but this was a different kind of trial. It was not one she could solve with a dagger in the dark. Even Sansa, usually so composed, was visibly strained as she navigated these negotiations. Bran was a pillar of calm, though he offered no direct push in any direction. Jon tried to placate Daenerys, but with each passing day, he felt more certain the North would not bend easily. And Daenerys, she grew colder, more distant, her dream of sitting the Iron Throne threatened by a girl she had not foreseen as a rival. At last, a compromise was proposed by Tyrion, who saw a potential path to unity. He arranged for a grand assembly, a great council, not unlike the one that once selected a king to replace a childless monarch. But this time, every region would send delegates, not only highborn lords but also respected representatives from among the knights, even a few from the small folk or trades guilds. They would meet at Harrenhal, a place large enough to host many delegates, central enough for all kingdoms to reach. There, they would debate openly who should lead them and by what right. If Arya Stark wished to put forth her name, she could. If Daenerys insisted on her claim, she would be free to present it. Jon could, if he wanted, or any other claimant, though Jon seemed determined not to. The Great Council would decide the fate of the realm. This arrangement was fraught with challenges, but it was agreed upon, grudgingly by Daenerys, cautiously by Arya, and with relief by most of the lords who sought a peaceful resolution. Winterfell prepared to send its contingent. Daenerys, discontent but resigned, mustered her remaining forces. Jon tried to speak to Arya privately before they departed, but she was often elusive, slipping away to train with her sword or to walk the ramparts in quiet reflection. She was struggling to come to terms with the possibility of ascending a throne, or any throne at all. On a cold morning, the caravans and columns of soldiers set forth. The road south from Winterfell was muddy and treacherous, lined with half-frozen slush. Rains had begun, turning the ground into a slippery mire. The banners of the north marched alongside the Targaryen sigils, an uneasy alliance. Arya rode near the front, flanked by the Hound and a small retinue, with Sansa's carriage not far behind. The hush of the north accompanied them, a land still haunted by the memory of the undead. As they crossed the neck and moved into the riverlands, they encountered more travelers, all heading the same direction, Harrenhal. The once majestic fortress, gutted by dragonfire centuries ago, loomed in the distance like a dark, broken crown. Fitting, Arya thought grimly, that they would decide the kingdom's future in a place ravaged by the past. Harrenhal's massive walls overshadowed the encampments that sprang up around it. Thousands gathered, lords, ladies, knights, merchants, peasants, emissaries. Tents of every color dotted the fields, while ships arrived along the nearby waters bearing supplies and further delegates. Within the battered stronghold, the largest remaining hall was prepared for the Great Council. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, tension, and even fear. Rumors circulated that Cersei might attempt sabotage or send assassins. Others whispered that Daenerys might unleash her dragon in a show of force. And many, many more spoke of Arya Stark, the hero of the Long Night, come to stake her claim or perhaps to refuse it. No one seemed entirely sure what she would do. Arya herself felt the weight of every eye. At night, she dreamed of the faceless men, of Jaqen Hagar's cryptic smiles, as though reminding her that identity was as fluid as a mask. She dreamt of the weirwood face, of her father's voice, of blood on a snowy courtyard. Sometimes she dreamt of the Night King's cold presence, reminding her that death was always near. She woke each morning with her heart pounding, and only the memory of Gendry's comforting voice or Sansa's unwavering support grounded her enough to face the day. When the Great Council convened, the hall was packed. Stone pillars soared overhead, blackened by past fires, and the floor was set with rough-hewn benches. At the front, a small dais was erected. Daenerys stood there with Jon, her face carefully composed, her Targaryen banners draped behind her. The lords and ladies filed in, murmuring as they found places. Sansa took a seat among the northern delegation, while Tyrion and Varys took positions near Daenerys. Arya found a spot somewhat off to the side, uncertain whether to stand or sit. The hush that fell as she entered was so profound that her footsteps seemed to echo. At length, Tyrion called the assembly to order with a curt nod. He addressed the crowd, his voice carrying, "We come here at the turn of a new age. The threat beyond the wall is gone, and we stand as a realm uncertain how to proceed. In times past, a great council decided matters of succession when the line of kings was in doubt. We invoke the tradition now to avoid bloodshed, to forge a path toward peace. I ask that each representative here hold to the same oath. We will honor the decision made by the majority for the good of the realm." His words met an uneasy chorus of nods. Then Daenerys stepped forward to present her claim, speaking of her father's throne, the Targaryen unification of the Seven Kingdoms, her role in ending the threat of the Night King, and her continued desire to free all from tyranny. She promised justice, prosperity, and end to the cruelty that had plagued Westeros. She reminded them how her dragons had helped decimate the undead, though the cost was high. Next, delegates asked questions, demanded clarifications, expressed their concerns. She faced them all with regal poise, occasionally leaning on Jon to clarify certain northern alliances. Jon himself, when questioned, refused to press his claim to the throne, reiterating that he had no interest in it. He declared support for Daenerys, albeit with a hint of ambivalence in his eyes. Sansa spoke next, praising Daenerys' role in the Great War, but also emphasizing the North's desire for independence should Daenerys take the throne. That notion made Daenerys bristle, but the council took note. Finally, the floor was open for other candidates. At first, no one spoke. A hush shrouded the hall. But then Lord Royce, that staunch supporter, rose again. We of the Vale would put forth the name of Arya Stark, Slayer of the Night King. Many voices cry out for her leadership. The tension in the room spiked. All eyes landed on Arya. She clenched her jaw, then slowly rose. Her voice was clear. I never sought this. But if you ask me to stand here, I will. I saved the realm from the dead because it was my home and my family was in peril. I want nothing more than for the realm to be at peace. I have traveled far, to the free cities and beyond, and I have seen cruelty in every corner of the world. If I were queen, I would aim to end that cruelty. But I cannot promise I know how to play these games or how to please everyone. I can only promise that I will act swiftly to protect the innocent and punish those who spill innocent blood. She swallowed, feeling a rush of adrenaline. If you think my sword and my sense of justice is enough to guide the realm, so be it. If not, choose another. Her words startled some. They expected lofty speeches, a polished argument. What they got was raw, candid determination. And yet, it resonated. The crowd murmured. Some looked skeptical, others were visibly moved. Daenerys glowered, crossing her arms. Tyrion, ever observant, looked impressed by Arya's forthrightness, if also somewhat anxious about its implications. The lords debated, the crowd buzzing with conversation. Delegates from the Riverlands spoke up, recalling the Starks' unwavering defense of their people. Those from Dorne were intrigued by a female monarch who had proven herself in battle, reminiscent of their own warrior traditions. Some in the Reach were hesitant, while a few Stormlanders, mindful of Gendry's respect for Arya, seemed inclined to favor her. All the while, scribes tallied arguments and positions. The debate stretched for hours, with breaks for rest and food. As evening's dim light filtered through the broken roof of Harrenhal's Grand Hall, Tyrion requested that a formal vote be taken. The vote was not a secret one. Each delegation would rise and announce their preference. Daenerys or Arya. Or they could abstain or propose a different name. There was no shortage of tension. Daenerys watched, shoulders tense, as the Vale chose Arya. The North followed suit, nearly unanimous except for a few who still supported Jon, who in turn deferred to Daenerys. The Riverlands leaned Arya as well, albeit with some reservations, but still a majority. Dorne ended up split. Some admired Daenerys's earlier stances in Essos and felt a kinship with her rebellious spirit, while others were swayed by Arya's feat and her straightforward vow to protect the weak. The Stormlands were similarly divided, but the deciding factor became Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree in this alternate timeline or recognized as the last known Baratheon scion. Though not an official lord, he was looked to by Stormlanders for guidance. He spoke on behalf of Arya, sealing a slight majority for her in the Stormlands. Then came the Reach, battered by wars and with no clear leadership after the Tyrells' downfall. Daenerys had taken the Tarly lands, but the Tarly line was shattered. The scattered lords of the Reach debated fiercely, some favoring the Targaryen they had already bent the knee to, others wanting fresh leadership. Ultimately, they were evenly split. Each small house cast their vote in turn, leading to a tie which effectively gave them no majority. That left the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister's domain, now fractured under uncertain leadership, with Jaime gone and Tyrion exiled in service to Daenerys and Cersei still clinging to King's Landing. Their delegates looked at Tyrion nervously. They expressed reluctance to contradict the queen who had the might of a dragon, but also recognized that the realm might unify under a new banner more smoothly. After a tense deliberation, they gave a slight edge to Daenerys out of fear of repercussions. When the tally was done, it was close. Too close. With the North, Vale, Riverlands, and half of Dorne plus half of the Stormlands behind Arya, and with the Westerlands, half of Dorne, half of the Stormlands, and some of the Reach behind Daenerys, they reached an impasse. Tyrion was forced to call a recess, his face pale. The Great Council broke up in confusion and worry. There was no clear victor, no easy path. In the corridors of Harrenhal, tensions flared. Supporters of both sides argued openly. Fights nearly broke out. Arya retreated to a torchlit alcove, searching for some measure of calm. She felt dazed by the political labyrinth. Then, unexpectedly, Daenerys found her there. The queen approached, flanked by Grey Worm. She dismissed him with a curt gesture, stepping closer to Arya. "Arya Stark," Daenerys said, her voice low. "I have no wish to make you my enemy. You fought bravely and I respect your skill. But the realm has always been mine by right. You could be my greatest ally. Kneel, and I will grant you a place by my side. The North can remain under your governance. You can protect them as you see fit. But let me unite the realm under Targaryen rule as it was meant to be." Arya narrowed her eyes. A spark of annoyance flickered. "I don't want to fight you," she said, "but it is not for me alone to decide. The realm is speaking. And half of it doesn't want a Targaryen queen." Daenerys's jaw tightened. They are swayed by the romance of your feet. The living always need heroes. But that hero's story doesn't always end on a throne. Believe me, I know what it's like to bear the weight of expectations. Arya sensed the bitterness behind Daenerys's mask of composure. She also recognized that she could defuse the situation if she conceded. But she thought of all the people who believed in her, who were desperate for a ruler they could trust not to bring dragon fire on their heads or slip into tyranny. She recalled how many had died in the mad hunts for power. She considered Daenerys's fierce ambition and how easily that ambition had once turned hearts to ash in other possible futures. Could Arya truly kneel and let that ambition steer the realm with no checks? She shook her head slowly. I won't kneel, she said, voice calm. Not because I hunger for power, but because I see what power can do. If the people want me, I won't abandon them. Daenerys's eyes flashed. The conversation might have escalated, but at that moment, Jon appeared, stepping into the alcove. He looked between them, wariness in his posture. We need to find a solution, quickly, he said quietly. Tempers are running hot. Daenerys shot Arya one last lingering glare, then swept away with a swirl of her cloak, summoning Grey Worm to her side. Jon watched her go, then exhaled heavily. This is tearing everyone apart, he muttered. I wish there was another way. Arya pressed her lips together. Sometimes there's no easy way, she replied, echoes of her father's wisdom in her mind. Sometimes you have to face the storm. That night, the lords convened again, but the tension in the hall was a powder keg. Daenerys, pressed by her advisors, made a final impassioned plea. She recounted her youth in exile, her triumphs in Essos, the forging of alliances, and her willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. She demanded that they honor her birthright or face the possibility of more bloodshed. The threat, though veiled, was understood. She had a dragon. She had an Remay. She could choose conquest if they denied her peaceful accession. Then the delegates turned to Arya. The hush was so absolute that even the crackle of torches seemed deafening. She rose, heart pounding, feeling the eyes of hundreds of watchers. They wanted reassurance, or a vow, or a reason to stand with her despite the risk of incurring a Targaryen's wrath. I cannot match the fearsome power of a dragon, Arya began quietly, nor do I want to. My family words are winter is coming. We are reminded that hardships are inevitable, that we must stand together or fall. I stand before you not as a conqueror or a queen of old lineage, but as someone who has seen the darkest night. I have felt death's breath. I fought to save everyone in this realm, not just my kin. I have no illusions about war. War is brutal. It ruins lives. If you choose me, I promise to defend you, to put an end to cruelty and tyranny, to listen to your voices. That is my vow. But I will not rule by fear. I will not scorch cities or crush children underfoot just to make my name revered. Her words were simple, but she saw them strike sparks in the crowd. Some turned uncertainly toward Daenerys. Daenerys's face was stony, her eyes blazing. In a move that stunned all, she commanded one of her attendants to signal for Drogon, the last living dragon, to come forth. A murmur of dread swept through the hall as the beast's roar echoed outside. Daenerys spun on her heel. Let them see why they should not defy me, she said, striding toward the open courtyard, the entire assembly following anxiously. Under the moonlight, Drogon descended, his massive wings stirring gusts of wind. Flames licked the edges of his maw. He landed on shattered stone, tail lashing. Daenerys placed a hand on his flank, turning to face the crowd. This is the power that broke the Night King's armies. This is the power that can protect the realm from rebels, from foreign threats, from usurpers. You need only bend the knee. A hush fell. Many delegates flinched at the raw display. Some knelt, fear etched on their faces. Others, especially those from the north, Vale, and Riverlands, stood firm, hands on their sword hilts. A clash seemed inevitable. Arya's heart thudded. She saw a potential slaughter if anyone acted rashly. Slowly, she stepped forward, ignoring the attempts of Sansa and Gendry to hold her back. She faced Drogon, feeling the furnace heat waft from his nostrils. She met Daenerys's eyes across the courtyard. Silence. Then Arya calmly drew the Valyrian steel dagger that had slain the Night King. She held it at her side, not in a threatening position, but as a reminder of what she had done once before. She took one step closer to the dragon. The watchers gasped. Drogon hissed, a deep rumble. Daenerys tensed, as if about to command him to unleash fire. Arya did not blink. She raised her voice. I am not afraid of death. If you kill me, Daenerys Targaryen, do it now in front of everyone. Show them the fate of those who will not bow. Show them what kind of queen you would be. Her voice rang with defiance in the cold air. But know this, if you strike me down, you make me a martyr for these people who want a different future. I have no illusions. I have seen the dragon's fire. But I have also seen a monster undone by a single blade. Dragons can burn armies, but they cannot burn an idea. And the idea that this realm can choose its ruler freely has already taken root. She paused, letting the tension coil. Her heart hammered. For a moment it felt as though the entire world held its breath, waiting for the dragon's roar, the scorching flame. Daenerys's eyes were wide, a tumult of fury, uncertainty, and fear. Her hand clenched around Drogon's scale, knuckles white. Time stretched. Then, with what sounded like a ragged sob, Daenerys averted her gaze. She did not give the order to burn. Drogon growled but remained still. Arya lowered her dagger, never breaking eye contact until finally Daenerys stepped away from the dragon and turned her back. A stunned hush fell upon the crowd. Many collapsed in relief, some burying their faces in their hands, half expecting to have been engulfed in dragonfire. But the flames never came. The Great Council in that moment saw a choice laid bare, fear or freedom. A queen who threatened them with destruction, or a girl who had risked everything to save the realm and now stood unflinching before a dragon. Something broke in the assembly, as though the final illusions had fallen away. One by one, delegations began to speak, some quietly, some emphatically, declaring that they would support Arya Stark. Some still clung to Daenerys, but their resolve was shaken. Even Tyrion stood there, torn, his face etched with sorrow at seeing Daenerys resort to intimidation. Within the hour, the tally was taken anew. This time, the shift was decisive. Too many had seen a glimpse of what might await them under a Dragon Queen's wrath. Perhaps Daenerys would have ruled benevolently, but in that crucial moment she had chosen to brandish fear. In contrast, Arya's bold stance had captured hearts. The final count favored Arya Stark by a clear majority. Daenerys, shattered by betrayal and the crumbling of her grand vision, turned to Jon in rage, demanding that he stand by her. But Jon could only bow his head, torn between love and the horrifying realization that she would have burned Arya alive if he had not intervened. Daenerys fled Harrenhal that night with her unsullied and Drogon, ignoring pleas to remain and negotiate. She vanished into the darkness, leaving a realm that had chosen another. In the days that followed, the Great Council formalized its decision: Arya Stark would be queen. They offered her the Iron Throne, though the seat itself was in King's Landing and currently occupied by Cersei Lannister. Another war loomed if Cersei refused to relinquish power. Yet, many believed that, with widespread support for Arya, Cersei's downfall was inevitable. Arya herself was overwhelmed. She stood in Harrenhal's battered courtyard, where the final announcement was made. Lords and ladies knelt, swords raised in salute, chanting, "Long live the Queen!" She felt no exultation, only a heavy sense of responsibility. She thought of Robb, her brother, who had been hailed king in the north and was brutally murdered. She thought of her father, who served honorably and died for truth. She thought of the countless faces she had worn, the people she had been. She thought of the Night King's final moment, how the smallest of daggers could change the world. Gendry was the first to approach her, awkwardly kneeling, then standing and taking her hand in his broad one. "Queen Arya," he said, a grin tugging at his lips, though his eyes shone with pride and worry. "Never thought I'd see the day." Sansa arrived next, embracing Arya with tears in her eyes. "You'll do great things," she whispered. "I'll stand by you, always." Jon came to her, his face etched with sorrow at what had transpired, but he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He bowed, simply saying, "My queen." Tears glistened in his eyes. She knew he felt guilt for how things had turned out with Daenerys, but they were on a path neither of them could have foreseen. And so it was that Arya Stark, Wolf of Winterfell, faceless assassin, savior of the realm, became the chosen queen. The seat of her rule would not be the Red Keep, at least not at first. She declared that the realm would be governed from the north until the threat of Cersei's armies was removed. It would be the first step, she vowed, in forging a new order, one that might allow each region more autonomy, one that emphasized justice rather than conquest. Whether that dream would hold in the face of war and treachery was uncertain. Yet hope burned bright in the hearts of those who had placed their faith in her. Letters were dispatched to King's Landing, demanding Cersei's peaceful surrender. Unsurprisingly, no such surrender came. Another war brewed, though many believed that, with the majority of Westeros united behind the Stark Queen, Cersei's days were numbered. Soldiers rallied under the Wolf banner, forging alliances with the Riverlands, the Vale, parts of Dorne, the Stormlands. The Tyrell banner no longer flew, but the smaller houses of the Reach joined them as well. Even some Lannister forces, disgusted by Cersei's tyranny, covertly offered support. In the midst of preparing for the final conflict, Arya tried to navigate the complexities of her new station. Courtiers and officials vied for position. She dispatched Sansa to secure alliances and handle day-to-day governance. Bran remained a wise, if distant, advisor, his knowledge gleaned from the weirwood net occasionally guiding them away from dangerous pitfalls. Tyrion, torn from Daenerys, gravitated toward Arya's cause. Though she did not trust him fully, she recognized his intellect and accepted his cautious counsel. Varys, too, slipped into her service, intrigued by her potential to unite the realm in a new way. Gendry was named an official envoy to the Stormlands, bridging the gap to the old Baratheon seat. The Hound stuck around, though not for politics. He claimed he had unfinished business in the south and might as well fight under the Wolf Queen's banner. One evening, beneath the flickering lanterns of Harrenhal's war room, Arya pored over maps with Jon, Sansa, and others. They planned routes, supply lines, how best to approach King's Landing without leveling it to the ground. Arya was adamant she would not become a Queen of Ash. She would protect the small folk, spare them the horror of siege warfare if at all possible. "I'll go myself if I must," she said grimly. "I've slipped past many guards before. Perhaps I can end Cersei the way I ended the Night King, quietly, without a battle." Jon frowned. "It's too dangerous," he said. "Cersei will be expecting a stealth attack. She has spies everywhere. The city is ringed with scorpions to kill dragons. Who knows what else she might have planned." But Arya's eyes flashed with the old assassin's hunger. "I don't care. If it saves tens of thousands of lives, it's worth the risk." Tyrion cleared his throat. "We have an advantage," he said quietly. "Qyburn is cunning, but he underestimates the power of infiltration. If we can smuggle you in using some of the secret passages beneath the Red Keep." The plan took shape, dangerous but potentially decisive. If Arya could slip into the Red Keep, confront Cersei, and remove her from the throne, the Lannister forces might surrender without a prolonged siege. Many expressed doubt, even fear for Arya's safety. But she was resolute. Being queen didn't mean she would sit idle while others fought her battles. She had always forged her own path. Thus, a small, covert group made its way south. While the main army approached King's Landing, preparing for open war, Arya and Tyrion, along with a handful of trusted agents, took an unassuming boat along the Blackwater Rush under cover of darkness. They wore simple cloaks, kept their voices low, and steeled themselves against the possibility of being discovered. The plan was to reach the old tunnels Tyrion recalled beneath the city, slipping in at night. If successful, they might reach Cersei's chambers unseen. The night air was thick with tension as they navigated the murky waters. Arya felt her heart pounding in anticipation. Was this the final stage of her journey? Slay a queen to save a realm? She thought of the prophecy once whispered about Cersei's demise, the Valonqar, the little brother. But here she was, a younger sister in her own right, ready to do what had to be done. It was almost ironic. When the boat reached a hidden alcove along the river, Tyrion guided them to a rusted iron gate. Two of their companions pried it open silently. The tunnels beyond were dank, the air stale with disuse. Torches revealed dripping walls and rodent scuttlings. Step by step, they moved deeper, hearts in their throats, aware that any sound could betray them. Tyrion led them through winding corridors, up rough-hewn steps, past collapsed sections, until finally they reached a portion of the cellars under the Red Keep. From here, Arya would go alone. Tyrion insisted on guiding her further, but she refused. One person had the best chance of being undetected. "I'll find her," Arya promised in a whisper. "If I can end it quickly, I will. If not, signal the others to retreat. No sense in all of us dying if it goes wrong." Tyrion nodded grimly, understanding that no argument would sway her. "The throne room is heavily guarded. She'll likely be in her private quarters or the tower. We only have sketches to go on from when Jaime last confided in me." He pressed a rough map into Arya's hand. "Take care, Your Grace." Arya managed a half-smile at the title. "What do we say to the god of death?" she asked quietly, recalling her old mantra. Tyrion looked puzzled, so she answered herself, "Not today." And with that she slipped into the darkness. Her training as a faceless man served her well. She moved like a shadow, silent and sure. The Red Keep's secret passages were labyrinthine, but she used the map to navigate upward. Occasionally, she froze at the sound of Lannister guards clanking down corridors. She pressed herself against walls, heart-thrumming, until they passed. It brought back memories of the many times she had crept through halls not meant for her. The line between assassin and queen blurred, but she carried both within her now. At length, she emerged into a broad corridor lined with tapestries. This was close to Cersei's private chambers. Torchlight flickered on polished marble floors. She advanced cautiously, listening for the sounds of guards. Voices drifted from the far end, two men chatting idly about the rumored approach of a new queen's army. Arya flattened herself behind a column, carefully peering out. The two guards were stationed by a heavy door, presumably Cersei's entrance. She would have to dispatch them quietly or find another route. Drawing a small knife, she steadied herself. Her queenly garb and the weight of a throne seemed distant illusions. Here, she was the girl with the needle, the quiet killer in the night. She shifted around the corridor's curve, silently closing the distance. Their conversation masked her footfalls. She waited for the right moment. One guard turned to laugh at the other. Swift as a cat, Arya sprang. Her knife sliced across the first guard's throat, cutting off his laugh in a wet gurgle. Before the second guard could shout, she spun and drove the blade into his chest. They crumpled with muffled thuds. She carefully eased them to the ground, checking to ensure no alarm had been raised. Her breathing was ragged, but she forced herself to remain calm. She was so close now. She slipped through the door, entering an ornate sitting room. Velvet drapes and gold chandeliers adorned the space. In the far corner, a flicker of light indicated another room beyond. Carefully, Arya moved toward it, heart hammering louder with every step. She turned the corner, and there, near a lavish table with wine and fruit, stood Cersei Lannister, a wine cup halfway to her lips, a mixture of weariness and paranoia etched into her features. Her eyes landed on Arya in an instant, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Cersei let the cup slip from her fingers, eyes wide. "You," she breathed, recognition dawning. The Stark girl who had once been overshadowed by her siblings, now the rumored queen leading an army. "How did you?" Arya advanced. "No more words," she said, her voice low and steady. "Too many have died because of you. Surrender, and perhaps there can be mercy." Cersei's lips curled into a sneer. "Mercy? From a child turned murderer? Don't make me laugh." But she looked around anxiously, searching for an escape route. Finding none, she backed toward a drawer, presumably containing a hidden weapon. Arya was too fast, lunging forward, dagger flashing. Cersei shrieked, stumbling back. The queen's hand emerged with a small crossbow. She fired wildly, the bolt skimming past Arya's shoulder, leaving a searing graze. Arya grit her teeth, pressed forward. Another bolt whizzed by, lodging in the wall. Cersei fumbled for a reload, but Arya closed the distance. The dagger's tip hovered at Cersei's throat. "Don't," Arya warned, breath uneven. "It doesn't have to end in blood." But Cersei's eyes blazed with desperation. She tried to swing the crossbow up again. Arya's reflexes reacted before her mind did. She slashed, a clean arc across the older woman's wrist. The crossbow clattered. Cersei hissed in pain, tears in her eyes. She collapsed to her knees, grasping her bleeding hand. Arya stood over her, breathing hard. She could see the terror in Cersei's face, the realization that all her cunning, all her manipulations led to this moment. "Do it," Cersei spat, a bitter laugh choking in her throat. "I won't be paraded through the streets like some common criminal. If you want your precious realm to see you as a merciful queen, so be it. But if you don't kill me, I'll never stop trying to destroy you." Arya's gaze flickered. She thought of the names she had recited for years. Cersei Lannister was one. A name on a list that guided her through the darkest nights. She had promised herself she would kill this woman for all the harm she had caused. Now the moment was here. The final name in a litany of vengeance. Yet she hesitated, the dagger trembling in her grip. She was no longer just an assassin. She was a queen, a leader. Would killing Cersei in cold blood be justice or vengeance? Either might be warranted, but the realm was watching. The realm would learn of this moment. And in that moment's hesitation, Arya Stark thought of her father, who once said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. She thought of the thousands who died screaming on Cersei's orders. And she tightened her grip. A swift thrust ended it. Cersei gasped, blood staining her lips, and then fell limp, eyes wide with surprise, as though she never truly believed the end would come in such a stark, brutal manner. Arya stepped back, letting the body slump to the floor. Silence fell, punctuated by the distant crackling of torches. A wave of conflicting emotion washed over her, sorrow for the necessity, relief that the name was crossed off, a tremor of shock at what she had just done as a queen. But above all, she felt a grim resolution. The war was over. The realm was free of Cersei's tyranny. She retrieved the crossbow, tossed it aside, and pressed a hand to the graze on her shoulder. With a final glance at Cersei's lifeless form, she turned and slipped back the way she came, leaving behind the last vestige of her old list. She had no illusions this would be the last life she'd have to take as queen, but it was perhaps the last name that truly belonged to the frightened girl she once was. In the corridors, Lannister guards discovered the bodies of their comrades. Some saw Arya and rushed her, but she evaded them with lethal precision. Down in the cellars, Tyrion and the others waited, hearts pounding. When Arya emerged, blood on her blade, Tyrion's face fell. "Cersei?" he asked, voice trembling. Arya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Tyrion closed his eyes, grief etched in his features for the sister he once hated and loved in equal measure. But there was no turning back. The Queen of the Iron Throne was dead, and the new queen, Arya Stark, had delivered the blow. They fled through the tunnels, slipping onto their boat, carrying with them the knowledge that King's Landing was now leaderless. As the morning sun rose, bells tolled in the city, and news spread like wildfire. Some said the queen was assassinated. Others said she took her own life rather than fall to the Wolf Queen. The effect was the same: chaos and confusion followed swiftly by the collapse of Lannister power. Thousands threw down their arms. Some tried to fight, but without a central command, resistance crumbled. Within days, the gates of King's Landing opened to the northern-led forces. The city, spared a catastrophic siege, surrendered. Arya, traveling at the head of a combined host of Northmen, Riverlanders, and Vale Knights, entered through the battered gates. The streets were silent, the people peering from doorways and alleys, uncertain what to expect. Some had known only the cruelty of Lannister rule. They stared at the young woman astride a horse, a cloak of gray fur over dark leathers, a crown of simple silver twined with wolf heads perched on her brow. She did not march with grand pomp, no dragons overhead, no thunderous music. She rode quietly, her gaze absorbing the city's scars. She dismounted at the Red Keep, stepping onto the scorched plaza. Cersei's body had been laid out in a private chamber, and a hush settled over the entire palace. Sansa, Jon, and their allies joined her. The smallfolk ventured forward, uncertain, to see their new ruler. And there, under the shadow of the throne room's high arches, Arya Stark was proclaimed the rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, or however many would remain united after negotiations. Bells tolled, but this time they signaled a new era rather than impending doom. She ascended the Iron Throne with measured steps. The seat was forged of countless swords, a symbol of power that had cost rivers of blood to maintain. She rested a hand on the armrest, the cold metal pressing against her palm. She recalled how many had died chasing this ugly chair. She took her seat, feeling the hush that rippled through the crowd. Tyrion approached with the crown, but paused, uncertain. Arya motioned for him to proceed, and he placed it gently on her head. She exhaled, the moment heavy with the echoes of history. Then, raising her voice in the gilded hall, she spoke words that would define the realm for years to come. "I sit here not to command your fear. I sit here because the realm has chosen me to protect it, to guide it. I swear to serve the people first, to punish those who harm the innocent, to end the cycles of terror that have tormented Westeros. This chair will not define me. I will define it." A wave of awe shuddered through the onlookers. A queen who claimed she would not let the throne own her was unheard of. But Arya Stark was no ordinary monarch. She was the girl who went to Braavos, the wolf who killed the Night King. The realm had gambled on her, and now they held their breath to see if she would follow through on her promises. In the following months, treaties were drawn. The North remained a pivotal region, but recognized Arya as queen, bridging the divide that once threatened to separate them from the South. Dorne negotiated for greater autonomy, which Arya granted, establishing a precedent for each region to have more self-governance. The Vale, loyal to the Starks, played a major role in re-establishing order. The Stormlands, guided by Gendry Baratheon, rebuilt from the ravages of war. The Riverlands found peace at last, their fields no longer battlegrounds. The Reach, devastated by the Tarly fiasco, was given aid in rebuilding. Even some Lannister bannermen, those who survived, bent the knee, hoping for a fresh start. The Targaryen threat lingered, with Daenerys having vanished across the sea, some said, or to Dragonstone, others speculated. But for the moment, she was absent. Arya restructured the small council. She named Sansa as her hand, trusting her sister's political acumen. Tyrion, though his loyalty was suspect to some, was made master of laws, using his cunning for the realm's benefit. Brienne of Tarth oversaw the King's Guard, or Queen's Guard, championing honor and protecting the new queen. Davos, wise and trusted, oversaw naval efforts and trade. Varys remained the master of whispers, though Arya kept a careful eye on him. Jon, weary of politics, took a role in reforming the Night's Watch, whose purpose now shifted from guarding against the undead to patrolling the northern border and protecting wildlings who sought a new life. Gendry oversaw the forging of alliances and the rebuilding of regions battered by war, eventually becoming Lord of Storm's End when a formal decree recognized his Baratheon lineage. And so Arya Stark ruled. She challenged the old feudal structures, granting more rights to smallfolk. She encouraged the development of local councils to address issues rather than relying on a distant king or queen's ear. She traveled often, refusing to be confined to the Red Keep. She visited the north, her true home, walking the grounds of Winterfell with Ghost padding by her side. She ventured across the realm, seeing with her own eyes the condition of the people. She enacted justice swiftly, recalling her father's lessons that the ruler should understand the consequences of a sentence before carrying it out. She gave no quarter to lords who oppressed their people, stamping out tyranny on a small scale wherever she found it. This was no easy path, and she faced opposition, assassination attempts, intrigue, and sabotage. But she persevered. The memory of the Night King's cold stare, of the moment she ended the darkest threat in living memory, reminded her that if she could conquer death incarnate, she could conquer the petty evils of men. In time, a new peace settled over Westeros. Scarred, yes, but resilient. It was not a utopia, but it was better than endless cycles of war. Arya had become more than an assassin, more than a wandering wolf. She was a queen who had proven her right to rule by saving them from the dead, and by embracing a justice that cared more for the living than for the symbols of power. The people, who once cowered under dragons or plotted rebellion against tyrants, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a ruler who would not betray them for ambition's sake. Winter came and went, and the snows receded. Crops grew again, trade routes reopened, and children who had known only fear learned how to laugh in the streets. The cost of that peace would never be forgotten, for the dead still haunted the memories of those who survived. But with each passing year, the realm edged closer to healing. And Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen, lived on in the songs that bards composed. Some told of her leaping from the shadows to slay the Night King. Others sang of her facing down a dragon queen in a courtyard of ruin. Still more whispered about the day she quietly slipped through the Red Keep to deliver the realm from Cersei Lannister. She became a living legend, yet she always remained, at heart, the girl who practiced with wooden swords in Winterfell's yard, who never forgot the small kindnesses or the simple dreams of her childhood. She had lost much along the way, her innocence, her illusions, even the chance to roam freely as she once yearned to do. But she had gained something else, a purpose that transcended mere survival. She had become the queen the realm needed, if not the one they had expected. On her quieter days, when the hustle of court or the weight of decisions pressed too heavily, Arya would slip away to a corner of the gardens in the Red Keep, where a transplanted weirwood grew in a carefully tended grove. She would place her hand on its white bark and close her eyes, recalling the silent watch of the heart tree in Winterfell, recalling Bran's words that she would know her path when the time came. Sometimes, she felt the faintest stir, as though the old gods still watched her. Sometimes, a raven would perch on a branch overhead, its black eyes fixed on her. She would stand there, letting the rustle of the leaves calm her racing heart, a queen burdened and blessed. And she would remember that above all, she was Arya Stark, a daughter of the North, the girl who looked death in the face and said, "Not today." In that stillness, she found the strength to continue reshaping a kingdom that had endured too much bloodshed and heartbreak. She found the will to make good on her promises, ending tyranny where she found it, pardoning those who showed genuine remorse, forging new alliances with lands beyond the sea, and ensuring that never again would the living be caught unprepared for threats beyond the wall. She found the patience to deal with political squabbles, petty lords, and the daily tasks of governance. Because in the end, she remembered that her father once taught her, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. And now she was no lone wolf. She had become the heart of a pack that stretched across a realm, uniting a kingdom scarred by war into something resembling unity and hope. And so, the reign of Arya Stark was written into the chronicles. The Wolf Queen, they called her, the slayer of the Night King. She ruled justly, fiercely, a warrior's spirit tempered by the lessons of 1,000 miles walked in the shoes of the unknown. She never forgot the small folk, for she had once been like them, wandering the roads under assumed faces. She never shied from the sword when needed, for she had learned that sometimes darkness must be met with steel. And yet, she also knew mercy. Mercy that came not from weakness, but from understanding the cost of bloodshed. In every decision, she carried the memory of those who had fallen, who had bled for a land that now had a chance to thrive. Thus ended the wars that followed the long night. Thus rose the queen who had neither desired a crown nor coveted glory, but who wore both with a quiet determination that reshaped the destiny of Westeros. And in the songs of the future, mothers would remind their children that sometimes the humblest of paths leads to the greatest deeds, and that the deadliest warrior might also have the gentlest heart. For in the hush of winter's twilight, with the memory of undead horrors still a whisper in the wind, the realm remembered that it was Arya Stark, a small girl from the north, who had saved them from the dark, and then guided them toward a dawn of her own making. In the weeks that followed her coronation, Arya Stark found herself grappling with more than just the intricacies of governance. It was the weight of being watched at every moment, of feeling that every step might echo through history. Gone were the days when she roamed unseen through the secret corridors of a palace. Now, even the smallest of her decisions could shape the fate of thousands. No longer free to vanish into shadows, she had to remain visible to her subjects, to the lords and ladies, to the ever-curious eyes of the realm. Though she preferred the edge of a blade to the cold gleam of a throne, she understood that she could not hide from the duty she had accepted. She rose early each morning and found her way to the Red Keep's gardens, those stunted patches of green within stone walls, where the transplanted weirwood stood. It had been brought south by builders and gardeners desperate to please the new queen, though none truly believed it could flourish in this warmer climate. Yet some quirk of soil or magic allowed its pale bark to cling to life. She would run a hand along the trunk, take a moment to close her eyes, and let the hush of memory settle over her. Sometimes, she thought she felt the faintest pulse in the wood, as though the old gods still whispered across the distance from Winterfell's godswood to this lonely tree in the south. Then the day's work began. The throne room doors opened. Advisors, petitioners, and ambassadors from every corner of Westeros filed in, their voices echoing beneath vaulted ceilings. They had complaints to air, praises to offer, demands for gold or wheat or timber, disputes with their neighbors. Some simply came to see the new queen with their own eyes, marveling that a girl from Winterfell, a girl once believed dead, then rumored to be an assassin, then a queen by popular acclamation, now sat on the Iron Throne. She listened to them in that quiet, intense way she had. She did not posture or waste words. Often she asked direct questions: who was harmed, who had the rightful claim, what evidence did they have? She commanded with a stillness that unsettled many. The lords were accustomed to grand speeches or threats of violence. Arya rarely threatened, but when she did, she delivered on her promises with unnerving swiftness. If she believed a complaint was justified, she made amends. If she thought someone manipulated the law, she said so and ordered restitution. People quickly learned that though she was not a typical ruler, her judgments had a rare clarity. The small folk gradually took heart in this, for they believed at last they might find a hearing for their troubles. The highborn grew cautious, for the usual bribes and flatteries did little to sway Arya Stark. Sansa, as the hand of the queen, shouldered much of the administrative burden. She met daily with stewards, accountants, and scribes, mapping out supply routes, collecting taxes, and overseeing the partial rebuilding of King's Landing. The city still bore scars: rubble in some streets, burned-out shells of houses from when Daenerys's forces had first approached, pockets of starvation and disease that flared in the poorest districts. Sansa directed resources there first, determined to make an example of how the new reign would not forget its most vulnerable subjects. She recruited capable minds from every region, craftsmen, healers, builders, even a few representatives of the faith, to plan an organized program of reconstruction. Roads were cleared, walls shored up, and markets reopened. Grain shipments from the Reach, now more willing to cooperate, arrived to feed the hungry. Within the year, the city saw the first true signs of hope, though no one pretended it would become a paradise overnight. The poor still struggled, the wealthy still clung to their advantages. But there was motion, and sometimes that alone was enough to stir optimism. Jon Snow spent much of his time in a curious place between two worlds. Officially, he was no longer king in the north. That title and any other claim to monarchy he had renounced. Unofficially, he was still beloved by many Northmen, and they looked to him for guidance. At Arya's invitation, he remained in King's Landing for a time, advising her on matters of defense. Yet the city chafed him. He was at heart a man of the cold winds and open skies. Each morning he stood on the Red Keep's ramparts and stared north as though he could see Winterfell over the curve of the horizon. Gendry, who oversaw rebuilding projects and served as Arya's envoy to the Stormlands, often joined Jon for quiet conversations about the future of the realm and whether there might be a place in it for men who weren't lords or kings but simply loyal friends. Meanwhile, the presence of Brienne of Tarth as Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard eased Arya's load in one crucial respect: she had a protector she could trust without reservation. Brienne's code of honor, forged in hardship, allowed her to stand as a beacon of unassailable loyalty. Under her leadership, the Queensguard welcomed a new generation of knights sworn to defend the Wolf Queen, each handpicked for their courage and moral standing. Yet not all who came wore white cloaks with pure intentions. Some saw a young queen and believed it would be easy to manipulate her if they got close enough. Brienne's towering figure and keen insight quickly disabused them of that notion. Beyond the Red Keep's walls, the realm was not entirely at peace. Fractured loyalties still simmered. Houses that once followed Cersei found themselves leaderless or impoverished. The wealth of the Westerlands had been squandered by the Lannisters, drained in the war effort, or locked away in hidden vaults. Dorne remained cautious, testing the boundaries of the new system. In the Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy had reclaimed her seat, eyeing the main continent with a mix of independence and old grudges. She no longer needed to fear the Night King, but she was not eager to kneel to another monarch, even one as unconventional as Arya Stark. And overshadowing it all was the question of Daenerys Targaryen. She had fled after the Great Council, trailing a fraction of her unsullied. Rumors placed her on Dragonstone, or possibly drifting across the narrow sea to Pentos or Meereen. Where she truly was, no one knew for certain. However, stories surfaced here and there of a great black dragon glimpsed in the skies above remote seas, or of a silver-haired woman haunting foreign courts. Varys claimed his little birds reported that Daenerys had not given up her dream of retaking Westeros. Yet months passed with no sign of an open invasion. Arya suspected that Daenerys was rebuilding her strength, forging alliances, or nursing her bitterness in solitude. The realm was free, but that freedom felt precarious, as though a single spark could reignite a conflagration. Each time Arya looked up at the sky, especially when storms darkened the horizon, she remembered that a dragon could appear without warning, bringing fire and destruction to all she had worked to protect. Sometimes that sense of impending threat fueled Arya's determination. She renewed the realm's watchful readiness. The Crown's armory was expanded, forging weapons not only of steel but of new composites hammered out by Gendry's forging genius. The city walls were lined with scorpion-like weapons, bigger and stronger versions of the ones Qyburn had once devised for Cersei. Arya loathed the idea of turning the city into a fortress bristling with spears, but she saw little choice if they were to survive another dragon attack. She trusted no rumor that Daenerys might have lost Drogon. Dragons died rarely, and certainly not without leaving devastation behind. The watchers on the walls were instructed to keep their eyes open for any dark shape in the sky. Yet days turned to weeks, then months, and still no dragon soared overhead. The small folk gradually began to breathe easier. The Queen's justice was consistent, and the city grew calmer, if not wholly at peace. The markets thrived, especially once roads to the Riverlands and the Reach were secured. Taverns bustled with soldiers, traders, craftsmen, and travelers speaking of a new dawn. Songs about Arya's victory over the Night King were sung in corners of the city. In those songs, she was cast as a near-mythic figure, a shadow in the darkness, a deliverer from the cold. Arya found these ballads uncomfortable. She had never craved that sort of veneration. Sometimes, late at night, she slipped out of the Red Keep in a hooded cloak, walked among the people, and watched them dance or fight or gossip in the city's cramped lanes. She listened to the rumors swirling. Some still believed Daenerys would return. Others whispered that the Wolf Queen's reign was an omen, that the North would eventually devour the South. Superstition and hope entangled. Arya listened without judgment, letting the crowd's truth wash over her. When dawn approached, she would return quietly, slip past the yawning guards, and find her bed in the keep, seeking a few hours of uneasy sleep before duty called again. One dawn, as she stood on a balcony overlooking the city, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Maester Wolkin's letter was sealed with the direwolf sigil, urgent in its brevity. Your brother, the Lord Bran, requests your presence at once. Disturbing events in the far north require your attention. A shiver ran down Arya's spine as she read. She had not seen Bran in weeks. He had remained in Interfell, immersed in the arcane knowledge he possessed as the Three-Eyed Raven. Though he was not the formal lord, some recognized him as such, others saw him more as an oracle. When he summoned Arya, she felt it must be truly dire. She summoned Sansa, Jon, and her closest advisors to a meeting, determined to depart as soon as possible. The realm might see it as strange for the queen to leave King's Landing, but she would not ignore a summons from her brother. Sansa quickly organized the council's tasks in her absence. She would remain behind his hand, ensuring no vacuum of leadership. Jon volunteered to travel north with Arya, eager for a chance to return home. Gendry, mindful of his duties in the Stormlands, hesitated but agreed to accompany Arya if she so wished. She wanted his presence, and so he packed light, leaving his stewards to oversee forging operations. Brienne would stay in the capital to maintain security, trusting in the skill of her sworn knights should any trouble arise. Tyrion and Davos would oversee the day-to-day governance with Sansa. Together, they formed a hasty plan to keep the realm running. Within 2 days, Arya and her party departed, escorted by a small contingent of soldiers bearing the wolf sigil. They traveled at a steady pace, not wanting to draw undue attention but also conscious of the need for speed. The roads north had improved since the destruction of the undead army, though signs of that dark time persisted here and there: charred watchtowers, scorched fields, abandoned hamlets with gaping holes in walls. At each and along the way, people recognized the queen in her plain traveling attire, though they gave her a wide berth, unsure if she desired conversation. She typically smiled and spoke a few words of encouragement, but no more. Gendry sometimes lingered to chat with a blacksmith or stable hand, and Jon swapped stories with local hunters about how the forest game had returned after the long night. The land was healing slowly. As they ventured farther north, the wind grew colder, the sunlight shorter, and the sense of ancient memory stronger. Arya rode with grim purpose, scanning the horizon, haunted by the memory of the undead that once ravaged these lands. She wondered if Bran had foreseen a resurgence of the old evil or something entirely different. Ghost stories still circulated about wights in hidden caves or half-rotten bodies that stumbled into stray villages. Most turned out to be false sightings or fears playing tricks on the imagination. Yet the North had once known a horror that forever changed its perspective on the unknown. When they finally passed the gates of Winterfell, Arya felt an odd mix of nostalgia and relief. The courtyard stood as she remembered, yet different, bustling with new recruits, fresh lumber for repairs, and the confident strides of northern guards who bore the memory of victory. The hall still carried the familiar smell of smoke and pine. Old ghosts lingered in the corners of her mind. She saw the place where she had sparred with Brienne, the archway where she had once stood with Sansa, trying to reconcile the sisters they had become. That evening, the castle's staff prepared a modest feast. It was not lavish, for Winterfell had never been a place of extravagant displays, but it was hearty: roast venison, trenchers of bread, ale, and strong cider. Jon sat by Arya, the two of them exchanging quiet remarks about how much had changed since the last time they were here together. Gendry joined them, awkwardly greeting some of the northern lords who recognized him from the war. Around them, the great hall buzzed with conversation, but it all felt subdued compared to the splendor of King's Landing. Bran did not appear for the feast, which caused Arya's nerves to prickle with concern. She learned he was in the Godswood, as he often was these days, immersed in his strange communion with the past and present. She wanted to speak with him immediately, but the stewards insisted that he had asked her to rest for the night and join him at dawn. She hardly slept. Her mind ran circles around the dire possibilities. Could the others have returned? Or had some monstrous new threat arisen beyond the wall? When dawn finally broke, she made her way to the Godwood. Jon and Gendry offered to accompany her, but she asked for a few moments alone first. She entered the grove, the hush of the snow-laden branches pressing in on her. Bran's wheeled chair was positioned before the heart tree, whose red leaves fluttered slightly in the northern breeze. He looked the same as ever, pale, distant, his gaze turned inward toward places only he could see. She approached quietly and stood next to him, looking up at the carved face in the white bark. 1,000 thoughts churned in her mind, but she let Bran speak first. He closed his eyes for a moment, then turned his head to regard her with something like affection. "Arya," he said, voice low as the wind. "You've done well. Father would be proud." She felt a lump in her throat. Even after everything, slaying the Night King, toppling Cersei, sitting on the Iron Throne, she had never ceased to hunger for some distant semblance of their father's approval. She found herself kneeling beside Bran's chair so she could look at him eye to eye. "What's happening, Bran? Why did you call me here?" He blinked slowly, a habit he had developed when searching through the countless threads of time. "Something stirs in the distant north," he said. "Beyond the wall. Not the others, not the dead. It feels older. Wilder. I see glimpses, shadows moving in the white wastes, shaped like beasts. I see men in ragged pelts, worshipping something in the darkness. And I feel the land shifting. This is not a direct threat like the Night King's armies, but it's dangerous in a different way. Arya tried to keep her voice steady. How dangerous? Bran's gaze seemed to recede as though he stared at events unfolding miles or centuries away. The free folk whisper of old powers half forgotten. They say in the time before the wall was raised, there were tribes who communed with spirits that took the form of giant beasts. Some called them skin changers, but far more savage than our brother Rickon's bond with Shaggy Dog or your bond with Nymeria once was. These were men who believed they became the beasts they wore. Their worship was in blood and the primal heartbeat of the land. Arya's mind flickered to the memory of warging. She recalled how Bran had once explained that certain Starks carried the gift to see through the eyes of wolves and ravens. But this sounded far darker, more arcane. Why now, she asked. Why would this power arise again? Bran shook his head. I only see pieces. The future is fluid, but I sense they feel an absence now that the others are gone. It's as if they are stepping forward to fill a gap in the world's magic. Where the Night King once loomed, another shadow seeks to claim that space. A chill raked Arya's skin, colder than the wind. She had believed that with the Night King's defeat, the living might have earned peace from supernatural terrors. Yet the realm seemed inexorably bound to new and ancient threats. What do you need from me? She asked softly. Bran gave her a small, sad smile. You are queen of the 7 kingdoms, and that includes the lands beyond the wall, if such a claim holds any meaning. I am the three-eyed raven, and I cannot act directly against these new powers. But I can guide you. The wildlings who roam beyond the wall might be in danger, or might be drawn into something bigger. We must be vigilant before this becomes a new crisis. Her first thought was to raise an army to march north of the wall with enough soldiers to deter any threat. But she remembered the toll that such campaigns took, especially in that harsh, frozen wilderness. 1,000 men could vanish in those icy wastes. And if these new powers were as strange as Bran suggested, brute force might fail. She took a breath. We'll send scouts, gather more information. Let the free folk speak for themselves before we act. He nodded. Mance Rayder once united many tribes. Tormund Giantsbane leads them now, though he answers to no banner but his own. His people respect you for ending the Night King. You might be able to negotiate. Arya inclined her head. She felt a flicker of relief that Tormund was still out there, an ally, however informal. I'll do whatever needs doing, she said. Bran placed a hand gently on hers. Be careful, he murmured. The powers of the north are older than the wall, older than the first men. They do not bend easily, even to those chosen by the living. She left the godwood with her mind a whirl of half-formed ideas. She summoned Jon and Gendry to a private chamber in Winterfell's keep, explaining what Bran had shown her. Jon's brow furrowed with concern. Gendry looked puzzled, still grappling with the idea of shapeshifters and ancient powers. They discussed the plan. Arya and Jon would travel beyond the wall with a small party, a mission of diplomacy and reconnaissance, while Gendry would return south to manage affairs in King's Landing alongside Sansa. Winterfell could host the queen for as long as she needed, but the heart of the realm still beat in the capital. The last thing Arya wanted was to appear absent or indifferent to the rest of Westeros. Yet ignoring a nascent threat in the far north could be even more catastrophic. Preparations began. Jon was at once uneasy and eager. He had always harbored a strange longing for the land beyond the wall, shaped by his time with the Night's Watch and the wildlings. Arya felt a tug of anticipation as well. Part of her missed the quiet danger of the unknown. The trip would be perilous, yes, but also a reprieve from the unrelenting formalities of court life. She had always thrived best on the edge of a blade, forging her own path in the wide world. Now, as queen, she had to tread carefully, but the essence of who she was still rebelled against the stiff confines of a throne. They took 24 soldiers, each personally chosen by Arya and Jon for skill and loyalty. Some were northern rangers adept at hunting in snowy terrain. Others were seasoned veterans of the Long Night who knew the wildlings by name and harbored no illusions about the perils ahead. They packed furs, provisions, and dragonglass weapons just in case. Ghost accompanied Jon, prowling at the edges of the troop with silent vigilance. Arya's heart ached a bit when she thought of Nymeria, her long-lost dire wolf who now roamed the forests with her own pack. She wondered if she would ever see Nymeria again. Perhaps, she mused, the old magic might draw them back together on this journey. On the morning they departed from Winterfell, a hush fell over the courtyard. Gendry stood by the stables, clad in traveling leathers, having decided to ride partway south before veering off on the King's Road. He clasped Arya's hand, brow knit with worry. Be safe, he told her. I know you can handle yourself better than anyone, but still. She gave him a small smile. I will, she said. Keep an eye on the realm for me. And if Daenerys returns. I'll send word immediately, he promised. He squeezed her hand once more before mounting his horse and riding away at a brisk trot. She watched him go, a swirl of emotion in her chest. Whatever lay between them, friendship, something deeper, remained, but the demands of rule often pulled them in different directions. Jon appeared at her side, securing the last of the gear on his horse. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, taking one final glance at Winterfell's battlements. In her childhood it had been the whole world. Now she wore a crown that spanned a continent, yet somehow her loyalty to this place felt stronger than ever. She urged her horse forward and the party set off, passing under the ancient gate, riding through swirling snow that glistened in the winter sun. The first few days of travel north were eerily calm. Snow drifted steadily, covering the old tracks from the Great War. The wind had a keening edge, but they were well prepared with thick furs. Now and then they passed small pockets of free folk who had chosen to settle nearer the wall, no longer threatened by the old animosities. Some recognized Jon immediately and greeted him with a mixture of respect and humor. They called him Crow-turned-King, though he insisted he was neither. They eyed Arya as well, whispers passing from ear to ear about how she slew the Night King, how she was the Wolf Queen. Children peeked from behind snow-covered tents, eyes round with curiosity. Arya tried to speak with them gently, wanting to assure them that no harm would come from these soldiers. But she could sense their wary awe, the way they clutched knives or spears just in case. At the night fort, or what little remained of it, they found a watchful group of wildlings waiting. Tormund Giantsbane stood among them, taller than most, his bright red beard crusted with ice. He greeted Jon with a crushing hug. "You've come back to freeze your bits off again, eh?" he roared, laughter echoing among the stones. Ghost bounded up, tail waving, and Tormund ruffled the direwolf's ears. Then his gaze landed on Arya. "And here's the Night Kingsbane, come to see how the free folk are living?" Arya slid from her horse, stepping forward to clasp his forearm in the manner of the wildlings. "I heard rumors of trouble," she said. Bran saw shadows in the far north. Tormund's face darkened. "Aye," he said, voice dropping. "Some of our scouts saw them too. Heard strange howling in the night. Not wolves, not bears, something else. We've lost a few folk who wandered too far alone. No bodies found, just red snow and tracks leading deeper into the wastes." Arya's stomach twisted. "Any idea who or what's behind it?" Tormund spat in the snow. "We've come across a few scattered tribes that won't talk to us. They wear pelts of beasts and paint their faces with blood. Some say they're from beyond the frozen shore, a clan that never bent knee to Mance or anyone else. The real old ways, they say. Praying to gods we never knew. Might be they're conjuring something, or maybe they've gone mad living in the ice. Either way, it's not good." Jon exchanged a worried glance with Arya. Could they be uniting? Like Mance once did? Tormund shrugged. "Hard to say. But they're definitely not keen on friendly talk." He shifted his gaze to Arya, studying her. "You're a queen now, so they'll see you as a southerner. That'll make em spit. But if you're as fierce as the stories say, maybe they'll think twice before crossing you." Arya felt no particular satisfaction in the idea of intimidating them into submission, but she also knew that sometimes fear was the only currency certain groups understood. "Show us the tracks and let's see if we can learn more," she said. They made camp at the edge of the broken fortress, rummaging through the ancient halls for what scant shelter they could find. Tormund's free folk had pitched hide tents within the courtyard, lighting fires that danced in the gloom. That night, Arya sat by one of those fires, listening to Tormund's tales. He described hunts across the ice plains, glimpses of shadowy figures that fled at the approach of larger groups. Sometimes they would wake to find the remains of stolen supplies and footprints leading away into the darkness. No one had yet seen the extent of this tribe's numbers. She asked him if it could be a single roving band or if there might be more. He guessed there could be hundreds, possibly more spread out across the uncharted wastes. Jon hunched by the fire, Ghost at his side. "If these folk are truly dangerous, should we try to parley first, or strike fast before they gather enough strength to threaten us all?" Arya chewed her lip. The older might have said strike. But she had worn a queen's crown long enough to know that killing first could spark endless blood feuds. "We find out who they are, what they want. If they're mad worshippers of some dark god, we'd best know the shape of it. If they're just trying to survive, maybe there's a truce to be had." The question remained, how to approach them without spurring immediate violence. Tormund offered to send out a smaller scouting party on the morrow, accompanied by some of his best trackers. They would follow the footprints and see if they could locate the heart of this tribe. Arya insisted on joining, and Jon refused to let her go without him. They decided the rest of the soldiers would remain at the night fort, fortifying it in case the tribe launched a surprise attack. At dawn, they set off into the white wilderness, Arya, Jon, Tormund, Ghost, and 6 other free folk rangers who knew the terrain best. The cold out there was like a living thing, clawing at every patch of exposed skin. Clouds scud low across the sky, sometimes releasing flurries of snow that whited out the horizon. The group walked single file, each step sinking into drifted powder. Occasionally, they found partial footprints or the remains of an old camp, a circular patch where a fire had melted the snow, scattered bones of hares or foxes. Arya had never ventured so far into the untamed north even during her travels. This land felt empty in a way that made one's soul ache. The free folk rangers seemed untroubled, but even Tormund grew quieter, scanning the horizon with wary eyes. Around midday, they came across a gruesome sight. The remains of 2 wildlings, half buried in snow, their bodies savagely torn. Arya swallowed the nausea that bubbled up. She had seen her share of death, but something about this brutality disturbed her deeply. Jon crouched by the bodies, expression grim. "Teeth marks," he said quietly, pointing out the way flesh had been rent from bone. "Looks like a wolf or bear. But bigger." Tormund's rangers muttered among themselves, unsettled. One spat, no sign of a beast's footprints. Just the footprints of men. Arya felt a prickle at the back of her neck. Could men have done this? Men who wore the skins of beasts, consumed the flesh of their own kind? She thought of what Bran had said, of savage worship that blurred the line between man and animal. The sense of dread deepened. They pressed on, aware that nightfall would bring lethal cold. They needed shelter soon. As luck or fate would have it, they spotted a rocky outcrop in the distance, a sheer wall of ice and stone rising out of the snow. Tormund's scouts confirmed it might hold a cave system they sometimes used for temporary refuge. They reached it just as the sun sank, an orange glow washing over the endless white. They huddled in an ice-choked cave, lighting a small fire to keep from freezing. Jon and Arya took turns standing watch while the others tried to sleep in shifts, though no one truly slept easy. Occasionally, Ghost would growl low, ears pricked, as if sensing movement outside. But no assailant appeared. At the first gray light of dawn, they moved on. The wind had shifted in the night, erasing most tracks, but Tormund's rangers found fresh ones not far off. Larger prints, shaped like human feet but broader, with trailing lines in the snow that might have been dragged pelts or the tails of beasts. Arya's stomach fluttered with a mix of fear and curiosity. They followed the tracks deeper into the wilderness. The land rose and fell in gentle slopes, dotted with sparse patches of stunted pine. By midday, they found themselves at the crest of a low ridge. Beyond it stretched a valley circled by higher peaks, forming a natural bowl. Smoke curled from multiple campfires scattered throughout the basin. The group crouched, peering down. Even from that distance, Arya saw figures moving between. In the fires, people dressed in thick furs, their faces daubed with red or black paint. Some wore antlers strapped to their heads, others had the skulls of bears or wolves perched atop their own. The entire encampment looked primitive, savage, yet organized in a pattern she couldn't decipher. How many? Perhaps 50 or 60 visible, but there could be more hidden in tents or behind the rocky outcroppings. One of Tormund's rangers muttered a curse. Never seen them in such numbers before. Usually we spot just a handful skulking around. They're gathering. Jon studied the encampment, lips pressed thin. We should try to make contact, but carefully. Arya nodded. She'd learned that frontal assaults rarely ended well. She glanced at Tormund. Can you approach them with me? We'll keep the rest of our group hidden in case it goes poorly. Tormund scratched his beard, eyes flicking between Arya and the valley. You're the queen, but you're also the one who stuck a blade in the Night King. If these folk revere strength, that might speak to them. Or it might provoke them. But let's see. Jon objected initially, but Arya insisted. If this is going to work, I can't hide behind an army. Let's see if they'll talk before we decide anything else. He relented, though she could see the tension in his jaw. He posted the other rangers at strategic vantage points, bows at the ready, to cover them if negotiations turned violent. They agreed on a signal, a wave of a torch if Arya needed reinforcements. Arya and Tormund descended the ridge, moving into the open, Ghost padding at a careful distance behind. As they neared the outskirts of the encampment, she saw that these people, men, women, even some children, were indeed daubed in symbols painted in dried blood. Their eyes were fierce, set beneath face-covering hoods of animal skin. A few carried crude spears with jagged stone tips or battered steel axes, likely taken from wildlings they had slain. Alarmed shouts went up as the tribe spotted the newcomers. Figures darted closer, brandishing weapons, forming a loose circle around Arya and Tormund. One man, tall and broad, stepped forward. He wore the skull of a great white bear as a headdress, and a cloak fashioned from the bear's pelt draped his shoulders. Painted lines of red streaked across his cheeks, down his neck, and over his chest. He growled something in a guttural dialect that Tormund half understood, half guessed. Tormund shouted back in the common wildling tongue, lifting his hands to show no immediate threat. The man regarded Tormund, then his gaze flicked to Arya. Beneath that skull mask, his eyes narrowed. Arya stood firm. She raised her hands slowly, palms open, and spoke in a clear voice. "We come to talk," she said. "We mean no harm if you mean none to us." She doubted they spoke the language of the Seven Kingdoms fluently, but perhaps tone and gesture mattered more here. She repeated the gist of it with fewer words: "No fight. We talk." A woman slunk forward, half concealed by a wolf's pelt worn around her shoulders. She looked Arya up and down with open suspicion. Then she spat a harsh syllable. Tormund murmured that it meant Southerner, or something close to it, a contemptuous label. Another tribe member barked a question that might have meant, "Why are you here?" or "Who are you?" Tormund tried to explain. "We rule the lands south of the wall. We come in peace, but we see you have attacked our people." "Why?" Some in the circle snarled, brandishing spears. The tension thickened. The tall man in the bear skull advanced on Arya, sniffing the air as if testing for fear. She refused to step back. She stood her ground and let him see the calm in her eyes. She kept her dagger sheathed for now, though she could have drawn it in an instant if needed. Slowly she tapped her chest. "Arya," she said, pronouncing it clearly. Then she tapped Tormund's chest. "Tormund." Lastly, she pointed to the man as if asking his name. He made a low, rumbling sound. After a moment he tapped his own chest. "Ska." The syllable echoed across the hush. Arya inclined her head, acknowledging it. Tormund took this as a sign of progress. He repeated the name, then attempted again to speak of peace. Ska cut him off with a guttural bark. The circle of tribespeople pressed closer, brandishing their weapons. Arya felt her heartbeat pick up. She saw Ghost crouched low, ears flattened, ready to protect them if needed. Suddenly, a savage cry rose from somewhere in the circle and a spear lashed out. Arya twisted aside with reflexes honed by years of training, narrowly avoiding a sharp stone tip aimed at her side. Tormund roared a warning, stepping in to block another blow. Ska spun, bellowing at his own people, but chaos erupted. Several tribesmen lunged forward, seeing enemies in their midst. Arya realized that reason had slipped away from them, replaced by fear or fury. She had no choice but to defend herself. Drawing her dagger in a blur, she knocked aside a crude axe aimed at her shoulder. The clang of metal rang in the crisp air. Tormund swung his own blade, trying to keep the circle at bay. Ghost lunged at a spear wielder, jaws closing around the man's forearm with a snarl. In the distance, Arya saw the flicker of movement on the ridge. The rangers, alerted by the commotion, would come soon, but she and Tormund could be overwhelmed before then if they weren't careful. She parried another blow, twisting her body and slamming her elbow into a tribeswoman's neck, sending her sprawling. She shouted, "No kill," to Tormund, though she wasn't sure he could hear in the din. She didn't want to spark a massacre if this was just a misunderstanding. Ska roared something that made the attacking tribesman freeze mid-lunge. He seized one by the shoulder and hurled him back with astonishing strength. The man staggered, tripped, and fell onto the snow, clutching his bruised side. Ska barked more commands, eyes blazing. Gradually, the circle pulled back, though they still bristled with hostility. Arya lowered her dagger, chest heaving, snow swirling around her. Tormund bled from a shallow cut on his upper arm. Ghost bared his teeth for spiked. The tension crackled like lightning. Ska stepped directly to Arya, mere inches away, towering over her. He pressed his forehead against hers in a gesture that might be challenge or acceptance, she couldn't be sure. His breath was hot, rank with old meat. She stood absolutely still, keeping her gaze locked on his. For a heart-pounding moment, she wondered if he would snap her neck. Instead, he snarled something in his language, then jerked his head toward the center of the encampment. Tormund guessed the meaning, follow him. They ventured deeper into the tribe's domain. Rude shelters of hide and bone stood in small clusters, smoke curling from holes at the tops. The ground was stained red around some of these tents. Arya's stomach clenched at the thought of what might have caused such staining. Children with hollow cheeks peered from behind piles of furs, their eyes glinting with the same feral intensity as their parents. The entire place reeked of old blood, rotting meat, and rancid grease. She forced herself to remain calm. She was no stranger to death, but the atmosphere here felt heavier, as though she had stepped into some primal corner of the world where men teetered on the brink of becoming animals. Ska led them to a large central fire, around which lay a ring of stones inscribed with crude symbols. The woman who wore a wolf's pelt approached, carrying a smoking brazier of pungent herbs. She wafted the smoke around Arya and Tormund, chanting in a low, repetitive rhythm. Tormund frowned, breathing shallowly, but Arya forced herself not to recoil. Some kind of ritual, perhaps? She let the smoke drift around her. The woman's gaze burned as though reading Arya's soul. Then she turned to Ska and muttered a string of words. Ska nodded solemnly. Tormund whispered, "Think they're testing us. Or cleansing us." Arya murmured back, "Or cursing us," but she kept her tone neutral. A hush fell over the assembled tribe as Ska raised his arms. He began a chant, deep and throbbing, joined by others who took up the refrain. The sound resonated in Arya's chest, raw and elemental. She sensed an undercurrent of pain, or perhaps longing, in their voices. She wondered if they prayed to some ancient spirit older than the old gods. She glanced at Tormund, who looked equally unsure. Then the chanting cut off abruptly. Ska stooped and dragged a heavy chest from one of the tents. It looked far too fine to be of their making, carved wood with iron fittings. He heaved it open, revealing a trove of items they had apparently scavenged from dead wildlings or from raided caches. Among them lay steel swords, battered shields, leather armor. He reached in, lifted a single piece of metal, and tossed it at Arya's feet. She saw it was the breastplate of a Night's Watch uniform, black and scratched, stained with old blood. The message was clear: they had killed men in black. Possibly men she or Jon had once known. A flare of anger burned in Arya's gut. She forced it down, meeting Ska's gaze steadily. He spat a word that Tormund translated with effort: enemies. Another flurry of words followed, some pointing to Arya, some to the black breastplate, some to the swirling sky above. She caught references to crows and wolves, southerners, and the undead. She realized they must have hidden themselves during the long night, surviving in remote corners, then emerged afterward to find that the living now claimed the land. The references to crows might be literal Night's Watch rangers. Or it might be symbolic. Either way, these people saw outsiders as trespassers even after the fall of the White Walkers. They had no interest in uniting with the free folk or bowing to any southern queen. Tormund tried to speak, explaining that the long night was over, that the living had prevailed, that there was land and safety for all if they would cooperate. Ska grunted, unimpressed. He shouted something about our gods, then pointed to Arya's dagger, to Tormund's sword. The gist seemed to be that they believed steel was a corruption of the natural order, that men should kill with their own hands, their own teeth. The references to wearing the skins of beasts and devouring prey were not just superstition, it seemed they embraced a practice that tried to fuse man and animal. Arya shivered. This was more than a renegade clan. This was a cult of savage worship, fueled by ancient resentments and the belief that the civilized world was the enemy. Behind them, a cluster of tribesmen growled, clearly itching for violence. The fact that Arya and Tormund still breathed might be a fragile courtesy from Ska, who perhaps saw them as interesting curiosities. If negotiations failed, the circle could close at any moment. Arya weighed her words carefully. She pointed to Tormund. He is free folk. Not southern. She pointed to herself. I was born in the north, in Winterfell. A wolf. Then she slowly, cautiously touched the dire wolf sigil on her belt, the symbol of House Stark. A few of the tribe seemed to recognize that sign. The wolf woman in the pelt came closer, studying it. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, anger or fascination. Ska gestured for Arya and Tormund to sit by the fire. They did, though they stayed tense. The tribe gathered around, forming an audience as Ska barked more words. Tormund listened intently, then whispered to Arya, he says that if we are truly wolves we should embrace the old ways. Prove we are not like the crows or the dragon lords who burned this land. That's the only way they'll trust us. Arya suppressed a scoff. She had faced many trials in her life, but she had no intention of biting the throat out of a captive or some other barbaric display. Yet if they refused any test, negotiations would likely end in bloodshed. She stood, ignoring the stares. You want a test? She asked Ska. Then she drew the Valyrian steel dagger. The circle tensed. She held it out hilt first, a gesture of willingness to disarm in front of them. Then she spun the blade in a quick flourish, letting them see her skill before flipping it back into its sheath. I have walked in many skins, she said, voice firm. No fear of gods or beasts. Tormund translated her words as best he could, adding some embellishments about how she slew the Night King. The crowd murmured. The wolf-pelt woman hissed, suspicion in her posture. She threw back her head and howled, a sharp, chilling cry. Immediately, some half-dozen members of the tribe took up the howl as if summoning something. The hairs on Arya's arms stood on end. She glanced around, unsure. Then, from behind a lean-to structure, a massive gray shape emerged. A wolf, a dire wolf? No, not quite. It seemed smaller than a full-grown dire wolf, but larger than a typical northern wolf. Its eyes glowed amber and its muzzle was stained with fresh blood. A hush fell, broken only by the crackling of flames. Ska gestured at the wolf, then at Arya. A series of rough words followed, and Tormund's expression darkened. He wants to see if you can tame it. Or kill it. One or the other. Arya's heart pounded. The wolf let out a menacing snarl, stepping closer to the fire. Its hackles bristled. She recalled her old bond with Nymeria, the gentle trust that had grown between them. But this was no loyal friend. This was a savage creature, likely raised in the brutality of this tribe. She wondered if it had tasted human flesh. Tormund raised a hand in alarm. Arya, this is madness. You can't approach that thing. But she stepped forward anyway, drawn by a strange certainty that she must. She remembered the mantra, fear cuts deeper than swords. If this was a test, she would face it. She moved slowly, dropping to a crouch. The wolf snarled, baring yellowed teeth. She did not meet its eyes with aggression, but she also did not show submission. She let her body remain balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to spring aside if necessary. Behind her, the tribe watched with rapt attention, waiting to see if the Wolf Queen would fail or triumph. Jon, still hidden up on the ridge, was likely watching as well, poised to intervene if this turned lethal. But she hoped he wouldn't. This was hers to handle. She whispered easy, in a calm, coaxing tone. She let the wolf catch her scent. She was not naive enough to expect a magical bond just because she was a Stark, but she understood canines well enough to know fear would only incite it. Her breath came slow and steady. The wolf growled, edging closer. Its muscles bunched, ready to pounce or flee. She extended a hand, palm outward, letting it sniff the air around her fingertips. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then the wolf sprang forward, jaws parting. Arya pivoted aside, slipping gracefully out of the way. She didn't reach for her dagger. Instead, she let the wolf rush past, spinning to keep it in sight. The tribe gasped in surprise, maybe impressed by her reflexes. The wolf skidded, turned, and crouched low, preparing for another lunge. Arya wondered if the only outcome was violence. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering how she once tried to walk in Nymeria's skin, how her dreams sometimes took her there. She couldn't do it at will like Bran, but perhaps she could at least open herself to the possibility of connection. She let her mind calm, let the surrounding chaos melt away. The chill wind, the watchful tribe, Tormund's worried face, all of it receded. She focused on the living presence before her, the wolf's ragged breathing, the tension in its limbs. She tried to radiate calm, a sense of quiet acceptance. The second attack came swiftly. The wolf sprang again, jaws aiming for her throat. This time, she ducked low, hooking her arm under its neck and guiding its momentum aside. For an instant, she and the beast rolled together in the snow, a flail of limbs and fur. She felt hot breath on her face, smelled the rank odor of raw meat. A growl rumbled in its chest. She braced her knee, pinned it partially. The wolf whipped its head, snapping at her forearm. She pulled back just in time to avoid losing a chunk of flesh. The tribe roared in excitement or dismay, she couldn't tell. She felt the cold bite her skin where her furs had ridden up. Suddenly, the wolf broke free of her grip, bounding away a few feet. Both of them panted, mirrored in posture. She stood again, blood pounding in her ears. Slowly, she raised one hand, palm outward. Enough, she said, voice firm. Enough. The wolf stared at her, ears swiveling as if uncertain whether to charge a third time. She met its gaze, refusing to yield. For a heartbeat, she thought it would leap again. But then it let out a low whine, pawed the ground, and gradually slunk backward, lowering its head. She exhaled, relief flooding her, though she kept her posture guarded. The tribe erupted in shouts and howls, some of them slamming their weapons on the ground. Ska lifted his arms high, bellowing in a tone that suggested approval. The wolf-pelt woman regarded Arya with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect, as though Arya had passed a trial no outsider was meant to survive. Tormund grinned broadly, wiping sweat from his brow. Arya's breath shook with adrenaline, but she allowed herself a small nod. She had shown them she was no easy victim, that she had a measure of the old magic spirit, even if it was just cunning and well-honed instincts. Ska spoke again, haltingly, pointing to Arya, then to the wolf, then making a gesture as if tying them together. Tormund interpreted it to mean that Arya had proven she could hold her own among the beasts, that she might be worthy of further discussion. Arya straightened, ignoring the sting in her scraped elbows. She forced a note of authority into her voice, though the tribe might not fully understand her words. We came to stop bloodshed, she said. We can share the north. But you can't keep killing our people. Tormund tried to convey the essence in simpler language. The tribe listened, some scowling, others seemingly intrigued. At length, Ska gestured for them to follow him again, this time toward a larger tent in the center. Arya let Tormund lead the conversation, trying to glean what she could from the group's tone and body language. She recognized that even if she managed a fragile truce with Ska's band, more might lurk in the icy wastes, beyond reason or compromise. Inside the tent, a rancid smell made Arya's stomach turn. The bones of large animals hung from the ceiling, carved with runes. Piles of furs and hides covered the ground, and a small iron brazier glowed with coals, providing heat. Ska sank onto a cushion, gesturing for Arya and Tormund to do the same. The wolf-pelt woman hovered near Ska's shoulder, eyes never leaving Arya. A few others lingered at the tent's entrance, likely guards. The hush felt suffocating. Tormund began a slow, halting negotiation. He explained that the land south of the wall had opened to the free folk, that the White Walkers were gone, that many tribes had joined in rebuilding. Ska listened with an inscrutable face, occasionally grunting or spitting. Arya tried to watch for any sign of acceptance or rejection. At times, Ska would ask a question in his rough dialect, and Tormund would do his best to answer. Arya gleaned that Ska's people had survived the long night by retreating into deep caves, sustained by hunting monstrous creatures in the ice, bears, wolves, even rumored giants. They believed the living in the south had unleashed the dragon's fire that melted the snows, revealing them again to the outside world. They felt exposed threat. Ned. In their worldview, assimilation or cooperation was weakness. They had lived by tooth and claw, and they intended to keep doing so. Hours slipped by. Arya's legs cramped from sitting on the cold ground. She realized that even if they convinced Ska's band to cease attacks, it was not a permanent solution. This clan's entire identity was built on resisting outside influence. She wondered if there was some deeper purpose behind their rituals. Did they hope to reawaken a power on par with the White Walkers? Or did they simply worship brutality itself? Finally, Tormund turned to Arya, brow damp with sweat from the brazier's heat. "He'll allow you to see their sacred place," he said in a hushed tone. "Some kind of cave or altar they've made. But you have to bring no one else. Just you and maybe me. He wants to show you how they speak to their gods." Arya's pulse quickened. She glanced at the tent entrance, worrying that Jon and the others would react with alarm if she vanished alone into these savage rituals. But refusing might close off all chance of peace. She nodded grimly. "Tell him I'll go." They rose, stiff-limbed, and exited the tent into the frigid twilight. The sun had set, leaving a pale glow on the horizon. Fires dotted the camp, illuminating piles of bones and scruffy figures who eyed them with suspicion. Ska beckoned for them to follow. The wolf-pelt woman trailed behind, along with 2 guards armed with axes. Tormund whispered that the rest of the tribe would remain behind. Arya wondered if they expected her to be killed in the ceremony or if this was a genuine invitation. Either way, she had made her decision. They trudged across the valley, the snow crunching underfoot. The winds hissed around them, carrying the faint smell of ash from the fires. After a few hundred yards, they reached a rocky fissure in the valley wall. Ska led them inside, the passage sloping downward into the earth. A torch flared, revealing dripping stalactites of ice that shimmered like glass. Arya heard water trickling somewhere in the darkness. The narrow tunnel branched and twisted. She kept track of her path, ready to fight or flee if needed, though she suspected that if these people meant to kill her, she might have no chance of escape. Eventually, the passage opened into a cavern. It was vast, the ceiling lost in darkness. Stalagmites rose from the floor, shaped like fangs. Against the far wall, a ring of standing stones formed a crude circle, each carved with strange symbols similar to the ones on the bones overhead in the tents. In the center of that circle, a dais of rock jutted upward, stained dark. Arya's nose caught the metallic tang of blood. She felt a shudder run through her, memories of the faceless men's temple in Bravos merging with the horrors she'd encountered across Westeros. But this was different. This reeked of something primeval. Ska stepped into the circle, knelt by the dais, and placed his hands upon it. He let out a low chant, joined by the wolf-pelt woman. The guards remained by the entrance, watching warily. Tormund whispered, "Be ready." Arya crouched, scanning the stone circle. She noticed old scratch marks, trails of dried blood, bits of bone. It looked like an altar for ritual sacrifice. A chill deeper than the northern cold seeped into her bones. Suddenly Ska rose. He pulled a small bone knife from his belt and slashed his own palm without flinching. Blood dripped onto the dais. He lifted his hand, pointing at Arya, then gestured to the dais as if demanding she do the same. She understood instantly this was an offering. They wanted her blood to mingle with theirs, a symbolic joining under their gods. She glanced at Tormund, who shook his head in alarm. But she realized that if she refused now, all pretense of trust would be lost. She drew her Valyrian steel dagger, hesitated for the briefest moment, then nicked her palm. Warm blood welled. She stepped forward, letting a few drops fall onto the dais. The metallic smell of it coiled into the air. The wolf-pelt woman's eyes gleamed with something like triumph. Arya's heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. "Is this enough?" she muttered under her breath. Ska nodded, stepping back, though his grip on the bone knife remained tight. Then came the chanting. The tribe's language resonated off the walls, growing in intensity, echoing, swirling around the circle. Ska and the wolf-pelt woman threw their heads back, letting their voices rise. Arya clenched her bloody hand, wanting desperately to bind it. But she felt as though she stood on a precipice of something intangible. A swirl of torchlight flickered across the cave. The shapes in the stone seemed to writhe, forming monstrous outlines of beasts or half-human forms. Her blood on the dais glimmered black in the uncertain light. She thought she saw movement flicker across that surface. It might have been her imagination or the reflection of the torch. But it seemed as though the pooling blood stirred, forming a shape that pulsed once, then vanished. She blinked, reeling. The chanting built to a crescendo, then abruptly ceased. For a heartbeat, the darkness felt absolute. Her sense of self wavered, as if part of her mind reached out to something older and wilder than any god she had known. She braced herself against a wave of dizziness. Ska stepped toward her, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her wounded hand up to his face. She nearly lashed out, but forced herself to remain still. He sniffed her blood as if verifying her essence. The wolf-pelt woman circled behind Arya, placing a hand on her shoulder, breath hot against her ear. For a horrifying instant, Arya feared a betrayal. But no knives came. Instead, Ska let out a thunderous shout and raised his bloody palm high, as if declaring her accepted. Tormund exhaled sharply. Arya stepped back, pressing a scrap of cloth to her cut. She tried to keep her composure, despite the swirling tension in the air. The ritual was done, but she had no idea what it signified for her future. Ska nodded to Tormund, speaking a string of words. Tormund translated. "He says you have the blood of the wolf, and you are not a crow or dragon. You may have passage here, for now." It was not exactly a warm invitation, but it was better than open hostility. Arya inclined her head in thanks, her mind buzzing with questions. Had they just formed some ephemeral bond? Or was she unwittingly entangled in their savage beliefs? She had endured the faceless men's ceremonies once, shaped by a god of death. Now, she found herself stepping into another half-lit realm of dark magic. Would she never escape these shadows? They returned to the surface. The tribe, upon seeing fresh blood on Arya's hand, let out howls of approval or disquiet. It was hard to tell. But no one attacked. Ska muttered a final statement to Tormund. "He says they will not raid the free folk for now, but if your people trespass into their sacred lands, they will answer with blood. If you hold to that, there might be peace." Arya accepted it as the closest thing to a truce they might get. She turned to Tormund, who nodded grimly. "We'll spread the word," he said, "though it's a thin line to walk. Plenty of wildlings roam freely, and they might not respect these borders." "Then we need to warn them," Arya replied. "Better to avoid these lands altogether than to spark more killings." As they left the valley, the tribe parted for them with guarded respect. The large wolf from before skulked near the edge of the camp, tail swishing. It snarled once at Arya, but did not advance. She wondered if, in some twisted sense, it recognized her strength. They crossed the ridge to rejoin Jon and the rangers, who rushed forward, anxious. Arya raised a hand to show she was unharmed, aside from the cut. They retreated to the night fort to regroup. Arya and Tormund explained the precarious truce. Jon was relieved that she had not been killed, but worried about the future. A new boundary in the far north, inhabited by a savage cult that wanted nothing to do with the realm, was a recipe for chaos if other free folk accidentally crossed paths. But for the moment, there was no appetite for war from either side. As Arya saw it, to try to conquer these people would cost countless lives and might awaken powers best left buried. Better to let them remain isolated, so long as they did not threaten the rest of the north. She would dispatch rangers, in cooperation with Tormund's people, to patrol the borders and warn travelers away. Still, the images of that cavern haunted her. She couldn't shake the sense that something stirred behind those runes and that chanting. Perhaps the tribe did not even fully grasp the forces they courted. Late that night, as she stood by a fire with Jon and Tormund, she said quietly, "Bran warned me something was waking in the far north. If it's not them, it could be something they're trying to summon." Jon's face was lit by the flicker of flames, his gray eyes troubled. "Do you think they're trying to bring back the White Walkers, or something worse?" Arya shivered. "I'm not sure, but that altar was alive somehow. I felt something shift. Maybe it's just the old magic stirring. Or maybe it's a threat. Either way, we have to be vigilant." Tormund grunted agreement. "We'll keep an eye on them. If they break their word and start killing again, we'll fight back. But I don't fancy a direct assault in that cursed valley." Arya nodded. In the days that followed, they established a rough plan. Tormund's free folk would patrol the borderline to ensure no unknowing clans wandered into the savage tribe's territory. Jon would coordinate with the Night's Watch, now reformed to a smaller force, to keep watch at the wall. Arya would send word to the northern lords to avoid interfering in that region. It was a fragile, uneasy arrangement, but perhaps the only one that would prevent another war so soon. Before returning south, Arya visited Bran again in Winterfell's Godswood, recounting what happened. Bran listened without interrupting, his calm expression betraying little. Finally, he said, "The future has many branches. You've pruned one that might have led to a bloody conflict. But the deeper root may remain. Watch carefully, Arya. You carry the old powers in your blood, whether you embrace them or not." She left Winterfell with a heart weighed down by mysteries. The savage cult in the north might remain contained, for now. But what if they succeeded in awakening some new darkness? She resolved to instruct her rangers to keep her informed of any strange sightings, any sign that Ska's people were venturing beyond the valley. War might loom, but she would not spark it prematurely. Thus, she and Jon rode south again, gathering what few trophies or tokens of goodwill they could from Tormund's people. Snow fell relentlessly on their journey, as if the land itself lamented the precariousness of the peace. When they finally reached Moat Cailin and then crossed into the Riverlands, the climate grew milder. By the time they approached Harrenhal's looming ruins, the sun actually felt warm on their faces. Arya realized how long she had been away from King's Landing, and she braced herself for whatever crises might have arisen in her absence. Messages reached them on the road, carried by swift couriers sent from the capital. Sansa reported that Daenerys Targaryen had indeed been sighted in Essos, forging an alliance with some mercenary company rumored to possess war elephants. Tyrion worried about a possible invasion. Davos had been negotiating trade deals with the Iron Islands, trying to stave off new raids. Varys whispered that the faith of the Seven harbored factions displeased with the Queen, who showed too much leniency to heretics and wildlings. And Gendry wrote in a brief but heartfelt note that he hoped to see her soon, though King's Landing was roiling with rumors of conspiracies. Arya folded the note into her cloak, a small warmth in her chest. When at last the gates of King's Landing came into view, she found them newly fortified, bristling with scorpion ballistae perched on the walls. Banners of the direwolf still flew, but the city's mood felt tense. Rumors of Daenerys' vengeance must have spread. The guards saluted Arya and Jon as they passed, though the people's cheers were muted by anxiety. Outside the Red Keep, she dismounted and handed her reins to a stable hand. Sansa stood waiting in the courtyard, regal and composed, though relief shone in her eyes. She embraced Arya tightly. "I was worried," Sansa murmured. "You stayed longer in the north than I expected." Arya nodded. "Things got complicated. But I'm back." They ascended the steps of the keep together, passing anxious courtiers who bowed and curtsied. The great hall felt almost stifling after weeks in the open north. Sansa ushered Arya into a smaller council chamber where Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, and a handful of other key figures waited. Gendry rose at once, relief flooding his face. He started to bow but caught himself, stepping forward to clasp Arya's hand instead. She allowed the contact, a quiet moment of reassurance before turning to the others. "We have much to discuss," Tyrion said, a wry twist to his mouth. "Shall we begin with the smaller disasters or the larger ones?" Arya felt a weary smile tug at her lips. She realized she had missed the quips, the politics, even the frustrations of this place. She was the Wolf Queen, the slayer of the Night King, and now, apparently, the uneasy peacemaker between savage tribes in the far north and threatened realms in the south. She sank into a chair, motioning for the others to sit. "Let's hear the worst of it first," she said. Over the next hours, she absorbed a flurry of developments. Reports of Daenerys mustering forces in Essos, possibly allied with the Golden Company or another Sellsword army. Whispers that the faith's more conservative leaders saw Arya's acceptance of wildlings and foreign traditions as an affront. Rumblings from the Iron Islands, where Yara demanded autonomy in exchange for her support. The Westerlands were still reeling economically, and the Crown's coffers needed careful management if they were to pay for the city's defenses. It felt overwhelming. Yet she listened, asked pointed questions, and consulted with Sansa, who had done her best to keep things stable. Finally, the meeting ended, leaving Arya and Gendry alone for a moment in the council chamber. She leaned against the edge of the table, exhaustion evident in her posture. Gendry stood across from her, fiddling with a rolled parchment. "I'm glad you're back," he said, voice soft. "I heard you had some trouble with savage folk in the far north. Are you all right?" She met his eyes, saw genuine concern there. "I'm all right," she replied. "Just, the north is never simple." He offered a faint smile. "Neither is the south. But we'll manage." He hesitated, then took a step closer. "Arya, I know it's not my place, but if there's anything you need, beyond forging weapons, beyond building roads, just ask me. Sometimes I worry you carry too much alone." She felt a sudden lump in her throat. She remembered him telling her once that she was beautiful and her snapping back that she was not a lady. She remembered how they fought side by side in the long night, how they had parted ways, how he had bent the knee to her as queen. So many changes. Yet through it all, he had been there, in some form or another, offering her a steadfast companionship that she never quite knew how to reciprocate. She reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I might need that." They stood there, the unspoken words lingering until she finally withdrew her hand and cleared her throat, returning to the obligations of the day. And so began a new phase of Arya Stark's reign, beset by challenges from every corner. In the following weeks, she worked tirelessly with Sansa and Tyrion to consolidate alliances and keep the realm steady. They dispatched envoys to Yara, offering her a degree of autonomy so long as she refrained from raiding the mainland. They opened negotiations with the Faith, carefully navigating the matter of her unorthodox background. Arya even met privately with the High Septon, a wizened man who expressed concern about a queen who had studied under foreign gods and embraced the savage free folk. She spoke frankly of how the Seven had failed to stop the horrors of the Long Night, while the entire realm, Northerners, Wildlings, Dothraki, even a Targaryen, had banded together to survive. She assured him she did not seek to quash the faith, so long as they did not interfere with her pursuit of justice and peace. Their meeting ended with a grudging accord. Meanwhile, word from the north indicated that the savage tribe remained within their valley, abiding by the shaky truce. That was a small relief, but Arya doubted it would last forever. Her scouts reported no sightings of Daenerys in Westeros, though ships occasionally vanished on the narrow sea, fueling speculation that the Dragon Queen's new allies were testing the waters. The tension in King's Landing ran high as autumn progressed. People watched the skies with dread, half expecting to see Drogon's silhouette on the horizon. Yet, as the leaves turned gold in the Crownlands, a strange calm settled on the city itself. Free of Cersei's tyranny and the immediate threat of the White Walkers, commerce and rebuilding flourished. The harbor teemed with ships from Bravos, Pentos, and even further lands. The markets bustled with life. People began to tell each other that maybe, just maybe, the Wolf Queen's rule would hold long enough for them to see a new generation grow up without war. Arya heard these whispers whenever she strolled through the city in a hooded cloak, and she felt a cautious hope. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but if she could give the realm even a few years of respite, it might be worth the burdens she carried. On a crisp morning, she sat in the Red Keep Solar with Sansa, finalizing a trade agreement for distributing grain from the Reach. The door opened, admitting Gendry. He carried a small wooden box in his hands. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, bowing slightly to Sansa and offering Arya a crooked grin. "I have something for her grace." Sansa arched a brow. "I can give you two a moment," she offered, gathering up some parchments. Arya shook her head. "You can stay. I don't keep secrets from you." Gendry approached, placing the box on the table. "I heard about your test with the wolf in the north," he said, carefully choosing his words. "And you gave away some of your best steel to the Night's Watch Rangers. So I wanted to make you something new." He flipped open the lid, revealing a beautifully crafted short sword. The steel gleamed with a bluish sheen, almost reminiscent of Valyrian patterns, though not quite the same. The hilt was carved in the shape of a wolf's head, but it was understated, not gaudy. Arya inhaled softly. It was exquisite work, the lines flowing, the balance perfect. She picked it up, feeling how neatly it fit her grip. She could sense Gendry's skill in every hammered fold of the metal. "It's beautiful," she murmured, testing the blade's edge with her thumb. Sansa leaned in, impressed despite herself. "Your craftsmanship has come a long way," she remarked to Gendry, who shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. Arya rose from her seat, stepping aside to give the blade a few practice swings. It hissed through the air, a deadly whisper of steel. She felt an odd stirring in her chest, as though it reminded her of who she truly was beneath the crown, a warrior shaped by long roads and dark nights. "Thank you," she said, lowering the weapon. "I'll carry it with pride." "What do you call it?" Gendry gave a small smile. "I hadn't named it. That's for you to decide." She considered for a moment, mind drifting back to the savage tribe and the primal rites they performed, to the old gods and the dire wolves that roamed the north. A fleeting image of the swirling blood on the altar crossed her mind, mingled with memories of the weirwood in Winterfell's godwood. "I'll call it Fang," she said quietly. "It seems fitting." And so Fang became an extension of her hand. She wore it at her hip instead of the usual ceremonial sword she might have been expected to display as queen. Its presence steadied her. That same day, she went to the practice yard, surprising the knights and guards by asking for a sparring partner. Brienne was away on a mission, so she ended up sparring with a seasoned knight. A small crowd gathered to watch. At first, the knight, tall and muscled, treated her with respectful caution, but she quickly showed her lethal speed, weaving past his guard and tapping his chest with Fang's blunt edge. The watchers gasped, and the knight blinked in astonishment. She bowed, gracious but not apologetic. News spread that the Wolf Queen had bested a veteran in a friendly match. She suspected it would serve as a reminder that she was no mere figurehead. Even so, she could not quell the sense that events beyond the horizon threatened to shatter this fragile lull. The letters from her spies spoke of Daenerys more frequently. Whispers of a fleet being built in Volantis, of sellswords drilling on the coastline, of a dragon stirring from slumber. Each day, Arya expected to hear that sails had been sighted on the horizon, that a foreign army had landed on Westerosi shores. She convened the Royal Council daily, coordinating defenses, ensuring the city had supplies in case of siege. Tyrion pored over maps, muttering about how to best repel a naval invasion. Davos lamented that they lacked a strong enough navy to meet an attack at sea. Gendry worked with blacksmiths day and night, forging new scorpion bolts. Varys flitted in and out, offering cryptic updates from his network of informants. Yet, no invasion materialized. The days stretched and an uneasy standoff set in. The realm braced for war, but war did not come. As weeks slipped into months, some began to hope that perhaps Daenerys had abandoned her claim. Others speculated she was building a dread armada that would arrive when winter snows returned. Arya reminded her council that vigilance must not wane. In the meantime, she continued to rule, settling disputes between feuding houses, passing edicts aimed at rebuilding battered farmlands, personally seeing to it that a portion of the realm's wealth funded orphans of the war. Her popularity among common folk grew even as some of the nobility chafed at her unconventional methods. She listened to them politely when they complained about the cost of supporting orphans or widows, but she did not yield. Then, on a chilly autumn night, a raven arrived from the Vale bearing grave news. The Vale's roving patrols had intercepted a mercenary band near Gulltown, mercenaries who claimed to serve a queen overseas. Under interrogation, they confessed that Daenerys Targaryen had brokered a contract with powerful allies. They were but a scouting party, come to gauge the Vale's fortifications and gather intelligence. Word was that the main host was still across the sea, drilling for a spring offensive. The letter ended with a single, ominous note: "They speak of the Dragon Queen's vow to reclaim her birthright." Arya closed her eyes, letting the message fall to the table. She had known this moment would come. She had tried to prepare. But the final confirmation still felt like a jolt to her system. She summoned Sansa, Jon, who had recently returned to advise her, and Tyrion to discuss their response. The mood was tense yet resolute. They agreed to bolster the Vale's fortifications. Jon volunteered to lead a contingent of troops to support the Eyrie if needed, seeing as the Eyrie's forces had always been less numerous than the North's. Sansa endorsed the plan, though she worried about leaving King's Landing vulnerable. Tyrion suggested sending diplomatic envoys to Daenerys once more, hoping to avoid bloodshed. Arya listened with folded arms, feeling that every option was bleak. A second war for the throne loomed, and it threatened to tear the realm apart. The council debated late into the night, the candles burning down to stubs, each of them aware that a clash with the last living dragon could eclipse all other concerns. Arya asked each of them the same question: could we persuade her to accept a compromise? Perhaps cede some region of the 7 kingdoms, let her reign there if she must. But no one believed Daenerys would settle for a partial domain. The war seemed inevitable. At last, they parted, each weighed by the knowledge of what must come. Arya lingered alone in the council chamber, pacing the floor. She recalled the day she had faced Daenerys in Winterfell's courtyard, the moment the Night King died, and the sense that the realm had pinned its hopes on Targaryen fire. Now, that fire threatened to consume them if she could not prevent it. Yet, she would not back down. She reminded herself of all those who believed in her, of the small folk who had tasted peace and possibility. She would not surrender them to a queen who had once brandished fear so willingly. She gazed at the walls, at the direwolf banners that draped the chamber. In that quiet moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the responsibility, the fear of seeing the city burned, the heartbreak of losing the tenuous peace. But she remembered, too, that she was the girl who survived the worst horrors, who walked in the face of death and came out the other side. She would face Daenerys Targaryen as she had faced the Night King, with unwavering resolve, with the knowledge that if she must, she would strike the final blow to save the realm from tyranny. For the first time in many nights, she thought of her father, of that gentle man who believed in doing what was right even if it cost him everything. She bowed her head, imagining he stood beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She whispered, "I'm sorry if this isn't what you wanted for me, but I'll protect them as you would have." Then she left the chamber, Fong clinking softly at her hip. She walked the corridors of the Red Keep, quiet in the late hour, her mind echoing with the approaching storm. Another war was on the horizon. Another test of her mettle, her will, her willingness to pay the price. She did not relish the prospect of more bloodshed, but she would not flinch. The Wolf Queen would stand, fangs bared, between her people and any threat that rose against them, be it savage magic in the north or a dragon queen from the east. And so, in that hush of midnight, Arya Stark pressed on, determined to guide the realm through the trials yet to come, determined to hold her promise of a better future. She would not yield. She would not retreat. The scars of the long night, the savage rites beyond the wall, the ghost of Cersei, and now Daenerys's looming threat, all of it only solidified her resolve. She stood poised at the crossing of old shadows and new dreams, blood and steel in her veins, queen of a realm that needed her wolf's heart as never before. And somewhere in the frosted wilderness of memory, a single wolf howl echoed, low and haunting, as if calling her forward into the unknown darkness with fearless grace.